Chapter 1742. What are you worried about? Lu Xiaoyi was very curious. Qing Xian was very serious. Marching Monk is extremely shrewd and ruthless. He knows when to advance and when to retreat, and he doesn't lack the determination to go all out. In the Battle of the Five Rings, he suffered a small loss at your hands. Now, in Interior Realm, you forced him to kill his own hidden allies. With such karma, how can he let you go? So, although on the surface he took a step back, he definitely won't just defend and not attack. He must have thought of a plan to take revenge on you. You have to be careful, and it's best not to go out blindly. Although Interior Realm has been peaceful these years, there are still many life and death battles. There were originally more than 62 of these monsters, but now there are only these few left. Don't mess around too much and accidentally fall into the shit pit. Lu Xiaoyi felt that something was wrong. What do you mean by suffering a small loss at my hands? So, this has nothing to do with you? Now you're pretending to be a little white flower? Qing Xian looked at him quietly. Xiaoyi, I've been in Interior Realm for more than 200 years, and Marching Monk has done nothing. How many years have you been here? You forced him to break his own limbs. Tell me, if you were the monk, who would he treat as his main opponent? I admit that I mess around too, but I do it with a toothpick. You're different, you're using a large scoop. Lu Xiaoyi felt a little wronged, but it didn't matter. They were all First Severance primordial divinity, and it was just that the monk was a few hundred years ahead of him. After coming to Interior Realm, he had been controlling his emotions. If he could use words, he would try not to use them. This was to avoid attracting hatred and make things easier in the future. People needed to grow. If you killed someone here, his friends and teachers would bear a grudge, and it would affect a group of people. But now, after seeing the scenery of Hung River, this taboo no longer existed. This Dharma conference was not a success, but it was also not a failure. At least it allowed these young monsters to get to know each other, and that was the biggest benefit. Regarding the Hengi realm, other than the Marching Monk, no one else expressed their opinions. This was the shrewdness that a half-immortal should have. No one opened their mouths and shouted. That would be too shallow. The thorns had already been planted. In fact, they were just waiting for a certain time to mature. They were all major cultivators, so they still had this bit of patience. Looking at the empty flying cross-stream, there were only 3 people left. Other than Fifth Ring, who was in a sorry state, there was also North Wind. Lu Xiaoyi didn't invite him. Since he stayed, it meant that he wanted to be involved in the future. This was something he was willing to do, and others couldn't force him to do so. He must have his own considerations. These were not important. What was important was his attitude. If he stayed, he would be a friend. What do you think? Qing Xian asked. She had to admit that whenever she was with this guy, she had no choice but to follow his rhythm, regardless of whether she was willing or not. Strike while the iron is hot. Lu Xiaoyi did not hesitate. Qing Xian nodded. There was a time limit to the memories. As time passed, the memories would fade away. There were countless challenges for cultivators. The more time passed, the more troublesome things would be. Until the problem of Hung River was no longer the main problem, this was probably what the Marching Monk hoped for. Lu Xiaoyi asked, I still have one thing I don't understand. What are the conditions for leaving the interior sky? You guys have been here for so long, and no one has been able to leave. Why do you say there is still hope? Where is this change? Northwind lightly coughed, no longer keeping it to himself. What he didn't expect was that fellow Taoist Yen, who seemed so relaxed and casual, was actually the protagonist of the last great universe war. Not only that, but he was also from the Sword Mountain range and was famous for his savagery and bloodthirstiness. This was an opportunity. If they were to be associated with this person, their cultivation would no longer be peaceful. It was also a taboo. If they were to stand together, there would be endless trouble. He chose an opportunity. This was a normal choice in this era. Of those who came here, which one of them wished for their future to be ordinary? Theoretically, we can leave. But we need to wait. Among our group of people, there are more than 10 who cut their corpses after they became yang spirits, or they quickly became yang spirits after they cut their corpses. Although they are young, they have completely met the requirements of the interior heaven since ancient times to be qualified as ancient method half-immortals. Therefore, they can't leave. They are truly imprisoned. The remaining 40 or so are basically in the primordial spirit realm. Only this group of people is in an awkward situation of being neither high nor low in the interior sky. The so-called leaving here refers to this group of people. Lu Xiaoyi nodded. Well, it seems that yang spirit is one of the criteria. North Wind continued, this is only in theory. In the past few hundred years, many young half-immortals have tried to leave here, but none of them succeeded. Therefore, everyone is very confused about what conditions must be met to leave. There are all kinds of speculations, but now it seems that there is only one possibility left. That is when the next innate Tao collapses. If the collapse of the innate Tao is used to measure the changes of the entire universe, it can be divided into 3 periods. The first 12 periods are the early period, the middle 12 periods are the middle period, and the last 12 periods are the last period. We are now at the end of the early period, but the middle period has not yet begun. When we truly enter the middle period, the symbol will be the collapse of the 13th innate Tao. From the middle period onwards, the forces involved in the universe's disputes will no longer be limited to the cultivators of the main world. There will be various demons and ghosts joining in. We don't know which ones there are exactly. This is the arrangement of the heavenly Tao. However, our group may be one of the groups that will be granted freedom. Lu Xiaoyi sighed. What a thoughtful arrangement, adding layers upon layers. So, whether it is the interior sky or the exterior sky, everyone will be released in the end? North Wind nodded. Exactly. However, the judgment of the older generation is that they may be able to regain their freedom in the end period, or at the end of the middle period. It's hard to be sure. The changes of the universe are not only a matter of the universe, but also a matter of cultivators. No change can be separated from the participation of humans. Under this premise, the imprisonment can only be temporary and cyclical. It can't last forever. This is the law of the heavenly Tao. When the last few fragments break around the end of the era, I'm afraid even the immortals will be involved. That will be a different scene. I don't dare to think about it. Lu Xiaoyi was deep in thought. It was similar to what he had imagined. According to this rhythm, the problem of the Hung River domain had to be solved immediately. Otherwise, it would be more troublesome as time passed. Who dared to say that the Hung River domain had no reinforcements? Strike first and gain the upper hand. This was the best way to sneak attack. They had to wait until the Hung River domain reacted and reinforcements arrived. As soon as the 13th innate Tao was broken, they would immediately be attacked. They could not wait any longer. Chapter 1743. Qing Xian was also aware of this problem. We can't wait. If the middle phase is going to begin, then let us give it a grand opening. The life and death of a realm. This amount is not bad. But we can't do it with just 40 or 50 of us. There are nearly 100 yang gods in Hung River, and they are extremely powerful, so we need to work together. We need the cooperation of the main world. We need someone to go down and contact them before the collapse of the 13th Great Tao. There is still a long time to cross. This task is too difficult. The key is that we don't have enough people. North Wind couldn't do anything. He couldn't leave either, and he couldn't even spread the news. When he could go down, the attack would begin. How would he have time to contact the main world? Qing Xian wasn't in a hurry. She looked at Lu Xiaoyi. It's okay. With you around, it won't be a problem. I'll leave this to you. I'll be responsible for leading these interior realm half-immortals down as soon as the Great Tao collapses. You'll be responsible for coordinating the main world's cultivation forces. This shouldn't be difficult, right? Anyway, you know a lot of people. You have a card at your waist. Follow whoever you want. Lu Xiaoyi was speechless. This was a King easy task. Although it had only been 100 years since the last collapse of the 5 realms, the next collapse would only take 200 to 300 years. This time was very tight. This was because it took a long time for the cultivators to be mobilized. For example, it would take more than 200 years for the group of young gods to go from the Five Rings to Hung River Realm. What about the other allies?
Zhou,
Heaven's Choice? Anchor chains? Immemorial beasts? It wasn't that they lacked these forces, but as his realm increased, he understood a principle. If he wanted to fight, he had to pull together a multi-realm alliance. This was his attitude and position. Not only did he pull in these people, but he also pulled in the powerful backers behind them. If someone wanted to overturn the case in the future, he wouldn't succeed. This was because with so many collusions, how could you turn the case around? This was influence. Under the influence of the general trend, everything was successful. It didn't matter if what you did was right or wrong. Everyone did it, so it was settled. Qing Xian continued, Xiaoyi, it's not that I want to make things difficult for you, but in the current interior sky, can you find someone else to go down earlier? Not me, not the North Wind, and definitely not the Marching Monk, because we all came to the interior realm through normal means. You're different. You came in through the back door. North Wind's eyes widened. There's a back door to interiors? Qing Xian nodded. Of course. In this cultivation world, can you find a place with me where there is no back door? There were interior masters, exterior masters, and celestial court masters too. The cultivation world had it, the mortal world had it, the imperial palace had it, and the young lady's boudoir had it as well. Mortals call this a backup plan, but we call it the evasive one. I've asked the elders of my sect to check the records of cultivators entering and leaving the center of the interview sky. In the past few decades, there were only 3 cultivators who entered and didn't leave. But in fact, there are 4 more people in the interview sky. Little E, do you dare say that you didn't sneak in through the window? I've known you for all these years. You've never walked through the main door. You've always been sneaky, and you call it the unconventional way. The 2 of them looked at Lu Xiaoyi awkwardly. It's not that I wanted to go in through the back door. Isn't this just a coincidence? But just because I can crawl in doesn't mean that I can crawl out. Northwind laughed. You definitely can. Junior brother Yen didn't leave any traces in the interior sky, which means that you don't need to follow the rules of the interior sky. Because there's no record of you in the interior sky. But I don't think you can take the normal way, so you can only go back where you came from. Qing Xian didn't care about his feelings. She just felt that this person was like a cockroach that couldn't be killed. She didn't need to worry about his tolerance. She just needed to add more burdens. Before you leave, there are a few people you need to meet. The Crowing Rooster Prince comes from the Heaven's Choice continent. With his support, you can pull out a group of people from the Heaven's Choice continent. Isn't it too far? From the 5th ring to Heaven's Choice is 1,000 years. Have you considered the time? Lu Xiaoyi didn't want to go. Qing Xian ignored him. That's your problem. I'm only responsible for the arrangements. Heaven's Choice, you have to go because there's still immemorial beasts there. Pull in all the vicious beasts and sacred beasts, especially the black dragons. You'll have to rely on them to deal with the eternal river. Zhou Xian is right next to Heaven's Choice. How can we let go of the cultivation forces in this region? If there's enough time, anchor chain floating sinking and light should also go. They're all forces. At this time, it's not good to pull any of them down. They can choose not to come, but we cannot call them because this is a big matter in the eastern sky. Everyone has to go. Although light doesn't get along with us, this Prince Yi Lian of the Dendrobium is very different. In the face of major issues, he'll make the right choice. So you have to meet him. I'll arrange it for you immediately. Lu Xiaoyi was speechless. Ma Lu, when did you change your profession to be a butler? If I follow your arrangements, I'll die of exhaustion. According to what you said, if I have to meet this and that, does that mean I have to meet the marching army monk as well? Qing Xian chuckled. Of course he can't run away. However, I can arrange for this person, and I don't think I need to. He'll naturally find you. If he can kill you, I don't think he'll hold back. If he can't kill you, then he can only cooperate with you on this matter, Lu Xiaoyi said angrily. Then what if I'm killed? Qing Xian chuckled. I'll take care of your senior sisters for you. North Wind was very regretful. Unfortunately, my sect is too far away. Qing Xian shook her head. Junior brother North Wind, I appreciate your good intentions. This time's Hung River operation is actually a joint effort of the Eastern Sky's major realms to send out troops. The situation of the other 3 heavens half-immortals cannot be expanded too much. It's easy to be used by people with ulterior motives. We'll pull people from the interior sky. Little E will go to the main world to gather troops. When the 13th fragment collapses, everyone will gather at Hung River boundary to work. Lu Xiaoyi was very dissatisfied. Do we still need to pull people from the interior sky? I say, Ma Lu, you're really shameless now. All the dirty and tiring work is mine. You're just going to sit back and enjoy the fruits of others' labor in the interior sky? Qing Xian was indifferent. You just wait here for news. Don't run around. We don't have time to find you. Let's go, North Wind. Those princes aren't easy to talk to. We have to hurry. North Wind asked, if junior brother Lianyan stays here, will those Buddhists come looking for him? Qing Xian smiled. Don't worry, he won't die. This person's life is very tough. You don't have to worry about him. In the interior sky, the competition between the evildoers had never stopped. There were rules. Of course, you could eliminate the competitors in your heart. This was within the scope of the competition for the Great Tao. However, these actions were all individual actions, especially in a place like the interior sky. No one set any rules, but to compete for the Great Tao, one had to compete with pride. Chapter 1744. Lu Xiaoyi obeyed the arrangement even though he was reluctant. Qing Xian's arrangement was the only feasible plan at the moment. To him, the difficult part was how to leave the interior heaven, how to travel across those realms in the shortest time possible. The previous difficulty was how to keep it a secret, but now he no longer needed to worry about this problem. Even if it was Marching Monk, since he wanted to kill him, his desire to keep it a secret was more serious than others. The current difficulty was more realistic. The problem of space transportation was a pain that could never be erased in the hearts of cultivators. He waited alone at the flying stream, hoping that Marching Monk would come and settle the grudge. Qing Xian was the one who understood him the most. He knew that he had wanted to get rid of the monk for a long time. It was troublesome to find someone in the interior heaven, so he might as well take the opportunity to let the monk come to him. Between cultivators, this was the simplest and most direct method. He believed that Marching Monk would think the same. Such a person would not be afraid of the swordsman's reputation and stop moving forward. This was the cornerstone for further progress. He guessed right. Marching Monk and a few other monks traveled together, but they stopped after a few days. I still have some things to do, so I won't be with you. The monks understood. In fact, after Marching Monk shouted that last sentence, the key point in the middle could no longer be hidden. The relationship with the Hengdi realm was nothing, it was just a kind of use. If they were discovered, there would be a way to deal with it. If they could keep it a secret, there would be a way to keep it a secret. In the struggle of the universe, there was no one won. One of the senior brothers, who was at the first severance of Sun's spirit, suggested, "Can I help you?" Marching Monk clasped his hands and declined. "I'll deal with my own business. He's my nemesis, and also a hurdle that I can't avoid." Everyone was silent. On the path of Tao, everyone had their own hurdles, and no one could help anyone. If they acted rashly, it would not be helping but harming. They would not worry about any traps. Just as Marching Monk would deal with it alone, the swordsman would definitely wait alone. This was dignity, an essential quality of an interior heaven cultivator. They clasped their hands and said goodbye without hesitation. They had experienced this kind of parting countless times, and they would definitely experience it more in the future. No one could avoid it. In the sky above the flying cross stream, the two of them looked at each other from a distance, not saying a word. This was a battle of fate, and there was no way to escape. In fact, in terms of personal grudges, the two of them had never crossed paths before. However, after the 5-ring battle, both of them regarded each other as their greatest enemy. Marching Monk was responsible for strengthening Buddhism, while Lu Xiaoyi was responsible for reviving the sword vein. In this sense, There was an irreconcilable conflict between them. Marching Monk won the first round and achieved his goal in the 5-ring battle. Lu Xiaoyi returned the favor and forced Marching Monk to break his own arm. However, this was an overall trend. There was bound to be an end between them. This was the way of cultivators. In silence, the Marching Monk entered his natal Great Tao, the Great Tao of Nirvana. In the blink of an eye, Lu Xiaoyi, who knew a little about Nirvana, understood his roots. Nirvana was the result of practicing Buddhism. There were a total of 4 kinds of nirvana in Buddhism that cultivators could achieve. Nirvana that was originally pure but polluted, nirvana that had more than one meaning, nirvana that had no meaning, and nirvana that had no place to stay. Hinayana cultivators could achieve nirvana that had more than one meaning and nirvana that had no meaning. After Hinayana cultivators cut off their own thoughts, the highest realm they could achieve was called the Arhat realm. This realm referred to the elimination of all 7 senses, leaving only the 8th sense. The cultivators of Mahayana Buddhism did not follow the path of Hinayana Buddhism. In other words, the cultivators of Hinayana Buddhism were determined to enter the 3 realms and had no compassion for the masses. On the other hand, the cultivators of Mahayana Buddhism were determined to become Buddhas and had boundless magical power, living in the 3 realms. In addition to the above 4 kinds of nirvana, there was another kind of great nirvana, which was commonly known as Avatar Samyaksambodhi. It meant the Dharmakaya of Buddha. Marching Monk's great Tao lay in this. Nirvana was constant. It was the unborn method. It was not born due to fate and combination. It was an unconditional existence. Nirvana was joy because there was no suffering here. Nirvana without self meant that nirvana was not owned by me, not myself. There was no nirvana in me, and there was no me in nirvana. Death, nirvana, and nirvana could not be understood as entering a place or realm called nirvana. Nirvana did not have the concept of coming, going, entering, and exiting. It was an unconditional existence. If it was reflected in a battle, it would be unkillable. He was no longer me. So where could I find this person? Unless I could break this person's nirvana state, the flying sword would be useless. This was the battle scene after a cultivator reached a higher level. The application of the Tao state had reached an incredible level. The most important thing was that this monk had taken another step on the basis of nirvana. Lu Xiaoyi also knew about nirvana, but his understanding of nirvana was not on the same level as Marching Monk's, so he could not break it. This was also the reason why Marching Monk dared to challenge the swordsman. As long as the nirvana state was not broken, the flying sword would be meaningless to him. He would always be in an invincible position. There were gains and losses. The attacks in the nirvana state were very strange. There was no Buddhist power or Buddhist kingdom enchantment, but a more mysterious method. This was completely determined by the characteristics of the monk in the nirvana state. Nirvana was a Sanskrit word. According to the new translation, it was death, wisdom, and 2 virtues. Wisdom that had all the blessings was called circle. Life and death that left all troubles was called nirvana. Simply put, all virtues were circle, and all troubles were nirvana. In fact, nirvana also referred to the nirvana of nirvana. Becoming a Buddha was to prove this nirvana, so nirvana was not exclusive to Buddhas. However, mortals were always blinded by their dreams, so they could not achieve it. As the saying goes, confusion reverses dreams, and enlightenment leads to nirvana. Dreams were born from one's nirvana and nirvana. If a person could destroy one's dream, he or she would be able to prove one's nirvana, just like how a mirror can see light after removing a speck of dust. Therefore, the attack of nirvana was to destroy one's dream, or rather, to destroy one's nirvana. It was not to end one's life, but to destroy one's future. This kind of attack was meaningless to cultivators without ambitions or dreams. For example, it would not have any effect on a mortal. However, it was everything to these demonic half-immortals of the interior realm. Salted fish could not come here. Those who could come here had dreams, big dreams. Lu Xiaoyi's dream gave the military monk a huge shock. Chapter 1745. When Marching Monk fought with others, he had also cut off countless people's dreams and countless superego. Because he was using the incarnation of Buddha, as long as it was below or at the same level as him, none could escape. Buddha used the nirvana path to become a golden immortal, so he had the ability to cut off the dreams of golden immortals. However, when he tried to cut off Lu Xiaoyi's superego, he realized that he couldn't cut it no matter what. After thinking about it carefully, he realized that this swordsman was really good at blowing his own trumpet. His superego was actually above golden immortal Daluo. He couldn't cut it down due to the limitations of the law. This kind of battle was rather awkward. Lu Xiaoyi's flying sword couldn't cut I'm not mine monk, and Marching Monk's death couldn't cut through the swordsman's trumpet. Thus, they stared at each other and rolled the dice. Everyone stared at each other. Lu Xiaoyi realized that he couldn't break through the nirvana path, even if it was his 12 great Tao concepts. This was something purely spiritual and couldn't be broken through by the transformation of the path. If he wanted to break it, he would have to master the nirvana path to a certain extent. He didn't dare to think about it now. Before that, he really couldn't do anything to this monk. Marching Monk was even more depressed, because when he was in the nirvana path, this move of his would never work on this swordsman. Because his dream construction was lower than the swordsman, the key was that he couldn't change it. He felt that his pie was already very big, but in the world of blowing his own trumpet, the pie was bigger than the pie. There was no such thing as the biggest pie, only bigger pie. How could he dare to think about it? Of course, Marching Monk had other ways to fight. For example, he could withdraw from the nirvana path and use ordinary Buddhist techniques. This might be effective against other half-immortals, but it wasn't realistic for a swordsman like Lu Xiaoyi. If he really used Buddhist techniques against sword techniques, the only result would be him being beaten into the nirvana path. Both of them immediately realized the insignificance of this battle. At least at their current level, both of them still lacked the means to fight to the death. Pestering was not something that cultivators at their level could do. With a loud laugh, the two of them stopped. "You really dare to dream?" the Marching Monk complained. "I still dare to do it," Lu Xiaoyi boasted shamelessly. The Marching Monk knew that he was bound to lose this round. Since he couldn't destroy this swordsman physically, he could only think of ways to cooperate with him. Towards this, he didn't have any psychological barriers. If he could kill, then he'd kill. If he couldn't, then he'd negotiate. At their level, they wouldn't make bitter hatred. Of course, even if they'd cooperated this time, it didn't mean that they'd shake hands and make peace. If one day one of them felt confident, then they'd probably kill again. The Tao is very wonderful. There is more separation than reunion. Benefits are divided and reunited to establish a foundation. Take my plate seal and go to Luosu Heaven to find the Tongliao ancient temple. Within 3 years, we can gather dozens of great Buddhas for you. This is our attitude at Hung River. Lu Xiaoyi didn't refuse. Of course, he couldn't refuse. He was counting on these people to take the lead. Can I tell them what my purpose is? Or should I lead them to a place where you'll tell them? The Marching Monk laughed coldly. Just tell them the truth. You don't have to worry about keeping it a secret. The follow-up to Hung River is already under our consideration. The only difference is when we'll implement it. With your interference, we'll implement it earlier. Without these accidents, we can cooperate with them a few more times. Lu Xiaoyi nodded. This was also within his expectations. The Buddhism of this world had a deep relationship with the Hung River realm. For example, this nirvana Tao actually came from the ancient method of Hung River. The word nirvana was already used in the teachings of Jainism before the birth of the Buddha. It referred to returning to the tranquil Brahman that contained everything and was always happy and pure. In the ancient method of Hung River, nirvana was said to have come out of the world and was proven by the 4 paths of wisdom. It was the fate of Tao and fruit. It was called nirvana because it left behind the entanglement of thirst and love. Its original meaning in Sanskrit was to be extinguished or to be extinguished. Therefore, it meant to extinguish the fire of greed, anger, and infatuation in the world. As long as people were still entangled by thirst and love, they were still bound in the cycle of life and death. However, when they extinguished all their thirst, they would realize nirvana and be free from the cycle of life and death. This was the initial form of nirvana. However, in the long history of Buddhism, everything was changing. The meaning of the scriptures was also changing. It was no longer the only one. There was only one reason for the change. It was suitable for the cultural atmosphere and faith environment of the place where it was spread. Just like the national dishes of his previous world that were spread overseas, there was only one taste left. Sweet and sour fried, the ancient Buddhist Dharma of Hung River was also changing. In the end, the pure Buddhist Dharma began to be suppressed and ostracized. Now, the things that were circulating in Hung River had long become specious, completely separated from the Buddhist Dharma. They had become a combination of the local sects and some supernatural beings. Among the mainstream orthodoxies, not only did the Taoists find it unpleasant, but the Buddhists were even more unpleasant. They were the Orthodox Buddhist method that began to claim itself as the Orthodox Buddhist method after it spread throughout the universe. This was the relationship between the Buddhists of the main world and the Hung River realm. They were still connected and opposed each other. Because they were still connected, they could help each other. Because once the truth was exposed, the ones that wanted to destroy Hung River the most were these so-called Orthodox Buddhists. The reason why Liu Xiaoyi and Qing Xian's plan succeeded was because they saw through all of this. The fundamentals were already like this. How could they go wrong? Hung River's mistake was that they wanted to take advantage of the changes in the universe and the change of eras. They wanted to grab a piece of fat meat between the cracks of the Taoists and Buddhists. This was the most dangerous move. Perhaps they had been keeping a low profile for hundreds of thousands of years. They wanted to take advantage of the great changes in the universe to jump out and make their presence known. They forgot that the so-called Taoists and Buddhists had always been good at picking up soft persimmons. If they couldn't bite through the hard ones, they would look for soft ones to satisfy their hunger. Until the universe returned to peace, Taoism was still Taoism and Buddhism was still Buddhism. However, those who wanted to fish in troubled waters were all gone. How long would it take for you to travel from Luo Su Tian to Hung River Realm? Liu Xiaoyi asked. Regarding the movement of troops in the universe, this was a secret of the major powers. Normally, they wouldn't reveal it to others. However, the marching monk knew the purpose of the swordsman's question. This time, this person returned to the main world to gather troops. It involved a lot of people, not only the Five Rings and Luo Su Tian, but also many famous realms in the eastern sky and northern sky. For example, Anchor Chain, Floating Sinking Light, Zhou Xian, Heaven's Choice, etc. This was the procedure. It was an invitation that must be given. Only by inviting them would it be the greatest respect to these realms. Only then would these realms feel that they weren't excluded from the mainstream of cultivation. If you don't invite them, you will offend them. With so many goals, theoretically, it was impossible to complete them in a few hundred years. However, this wasn't something he should be thinking about. This swordsman could use the heavenly eyes to teleport. Therefore, if the itinerary was carefully planned, it wasn't impossible, as long as the 13th fragment didn't collapse too early. Therefore, the itinerary must be understood in order to arrange the order of deployment. Chapter 1746. If all the members are great Buddhas, they can arrive within 100 years. I don't know about the Fifth Ring's plan, but I personally think that the number of members shouldn't increase. Sun Spirit should be the main force. Moving around in the main world is a big problem. Sun Spirit is very different from other realms. Liu Xiaoyi nodded. As expected of the mastermind behind the great battle of the Fifth Ring, he had seen through many things. From the beginning to the end, the marching monk didn't worry about the safety of these great Buddhas. Whether or not Liu Xiaoyi would lead them to a place and then take the opportunity to settle his personal grudges was the breadth of mind of a great cultivator, and also a kind of trust. In the cultivation world, there were countless schemes, but there would never be such a strategy of abusing others' trust. After a brief communication, Dafa made up his mind. The The marching monk's figure floated outside, leaving only one sentence. This is only the beginning. When the era changes, we will have many opportunities to meet. I hope your life is strong enough to support your great ox head. I'll be honest with you. When we decided on the future, did you drink too much? Lastly, let me remind you. I feel that the 13th Great Tao might collapse very quickly. It will happen within 1 or 200 years. The marching monk's words contained several layers of meaning. For example, they weren't done yet, and there would be many opportunities to fight in the future. Don't think you can do anything just because you won this round. Yes, it was understandable for the loser to say such harsh words. For example, the mocking of his superego. Wasn't this decision a little too arrogant? Of course, the most valuable was the last sentence. It had been 100 years since the 5 Great Tao collapsed. According to everyone's usual guess, the next Great Tao after a batch of collapses would usually be delayed for a long time. So Lu Xiaoyi and Qing Xian both felt that they should still have time? At least 200 or 300 years, right? If there were another 300 years, Lu Xiaoyi might be able to rely on the heavenly eyes to transmit the news. With the heavenly eyes as the main force, he could run around. But if there were only 100 or 200 years, it would be a big problem. Even with the help of the spiritual treasure, he might not be able to make it in time. This was because he had to leave enough time for the person he was notifying. He could use the heavenly eye to teleport, but others couldn't. Moreover, he still didn't know Heaven's Eye's true attitude towards him. After killing 2 Heaven's Eye cultivators in a row, would they still allow him to take advantage of Heaven's Eye? The marching monk couldn't have said that just to disgust him. When their goals were the same, such an opponent was actually very reliable. He could even guess why the marching monk was so confident. The next Great Tao to collapse would definitely be the Great Tao of Buddhism. Furthermore, it was very likely to be Nirvana. That was why the monk was so certain. Sometimes, an excellent opponent could be as helpful to a person as a friend. The marching monk left, and in the next moment, another figure appeared. This was not a coincidence, but a deliberate attempt to avoid arousing suspicion. The person who came was a stranger. However, he had introduced himself during the spiritual assembly. He was the honest Prince Robin, a guest from the Sun Peak. The two of them greeted each other in silence. It was a little awkward, and they didn't know where to start. Obviously, Jinyao didn't know what kind of person this powerful swordsman was, so he was hesitant about whether he should come or not. Under such circumstances, perhaps a single sentence would be enough to make him leave. Arrogant people were always very sensitive. Lu Xiaoyi tried to strike up a conversation. You two should be very familiar with each other? He's a very outstanding monk. I can see that you respect him a lot. Jinyao replied awkwardly. I don't know if he's outstanding or not, but we respect you from the bottom of our hearts. Lu Xiaoyi smiled. In the past, I thought that people respected me because I was outstanding. Later on, I realized that people respected me because they were outstanding. The two of them looked at each other and smiled. Only then did they really throw away their prejudices. People with high EQ knew how to speak and how to conduct themselves. Therefore, even if you felt that it was funny for Yangding to put on airs and for someone who is not strong enough to be so arrogant, you couldn't say that. Being mean and being humorous were two different things. Speaking without thinking and being frank were two different things. Being uneducated and being casual were two different things. Not being able to differentiate between severity and being honest were two different things. A person with high EQ would definitely be a person with kindness in his bones. The kind of person you are depends on the kind of words you say. You know how to put yourself in someone else's shoes and be able to understand the difficulties of others. Your EQ is your feng shui. When it's time to give a step, give a step. When it's time to build a bridge, build a bridge. If you don't let others lose face, you won't leave yourself with no way out. Lu Xiaoyi was a master in this aspect. With one sentence, he dispelled all of Jinyao's scruples. Jinyao stared at him and said straightforwardly, Yangding needs such an opportunity. He needs such an invitation. Can Fellow Yin give it to him? Lu Xiaoyi didn't evade. I'm personally very willing to give it to you. But you know that it doesn't depend entirely on me. More importantly, how fast my short legs can run is more important. That damn monk said that I won't live for more than 200 years. Help me calculate the places I have to run to. Ji Niao nodded. With fellow Yan's approval, it won't be a problem. In our eyes, fellow Daoist's nickname is Running Lu. As long as it involves traveling and joining in the fun, fellow Daoist has never been absent. I have a true karma technique here. I can gather 10 young gods for fellow Daoist. Please. You're really at ease. Is it appropriate to put so many burdens on me alone? Ji Niao came suddenly and left simply. But Lu Xiaoyi was very clear about his real intention behind this move. The relationship between Yang Ding and the fifth ring was very complicated and tangled. From the beginning, they couldn't live under the same sky. But as the universe changed, the original hatred became dispensable under the universe's general trend. In fact, after plundering, the fifth ring generally wouldn't deliberately target others. Those who weren't strong enough would admit that they were unlucky. But there were also those like Yang Ding who had a certain strength and strong self-esteem who couldn't get past this hurdle. Thus, they became more and more involved. More than 1,000 years had passed, and Yang Ding was also reflecting. Under the premise that he couldn't fight against the fifth ring alone, was it wise to continue to be so unforgiving? Was it to disregard the shame of the past? Or was it to focus on the general trend of the universe for the future of the domain? Ji Niao made his choice. Yang Ding's strength in the eastern sky was second to a few big worlds. If they wanted to show off, they could only stand together with the big worlds. But the fifth ring was a hurdle that couldn't be bypassed. In terms of attitude towards Heng He, even the Buddhist sects of the eastern sky main world were soft and didn't dare to go against the general trend. How could a domain like Yang Ding choose? Therefore, looking for Lu Xiaoyi was like offering an olive branch, the first step to seeking reconciliation. When these yang gods of the eastern sky main world worked together to wash away a domain, Yang Ding naturally became one of them and could communicate with them. Many topics that couldn't be discussed normally would become much easier after a battle where they shared weal and woe. After that, everything would be natural. This was an opportunity to integrate. They weren't fools. Chapter 1747. After bird awareness, it was Heaven's Choice's third watch and sparrow steps, light's curtain, floating stars, anchor chains Feng Shao. Qing Xian was truly capable. Unlike Lu Xiaoyi, he was able to maximize the influence of the three pure ones. Of course, it was also because these people wanted to join and did not want to be excluded from the mainstream activities. It was not for themselves but for the sect behind them. No matter how much strength they contributed, they had to express their attitude. The 13th innate Tao collapsed, and the universe entered the middle stage. This was a day worth remembering. In the mortal world, they would set off firecrackers and fireworks. Of course, the cultivation world would not be so boring. In that case, slaughtering a realm was a good way to celebrate. With a goal, an opportunity, and a reason. Everyone congratulated the heavenly Tao and eradicated a heretic. That was the best gift to the heavenly Tao. The fifth ring was in a difficult situation because he seized this opportunity. With a little provocation, everything was settled. Did it sound like child's play? The cultivation world was indeed child's play. As long as you had the ability to throw such a small stone at the most suitable time, the most suitable place, and the most talkative crowd, you could cause a storm. Too early, it was not in line with the general trend. Too late, everyone would be very busy. Lu Xiaoyi, on the other hand, wanted to give up after everyone had left. Count yourself, how many realms are there? Even if there were no accidents during the process, would it take at least a few thousand years? I don't care. When the time is up, you can bring this group of people down to fight. I can only guarantee a few realms. I dare not say more. Qing Xian laughed. He also knew that he had gone overboard. These realms added together were enough for him to run. Even if he used the heavenly eyes, it would be useless. Even if Qing Xian went down with him, it would be useless. However, he never relied on luck when doing things. He would definitely plan properly. Forget it. Seeing that you are in a difficult position, I will teach you a lesson and let you know how to take shortcuts. Where did you get the interior sky? Lu Xiaoyi replied, splendid heaven and earth. Well, if you don't know this place, do you know the anchor chain? If I want to sneak out from the interior sky, I will probably appear at a place 30 years away from the anchor chain. Moreover, it may take a few years to go through that passage. Qing Xian said seriously, I once asked the 3 Pure One seniors in the interior sky how to travel freely in the main world. They taught me a trick. Today, I will tell you. You owe me a big favor. You must think of a way to repay me in the future. Lu Xiaoyi turned his head away. Say it or not, I don't care. Qing Xian had no other choice but to say, no one could sneak out quietly. Knowing you is the biggest mistake of my life. Let me tell you, the most convenient way to travel freely in the main world is through the interior sky. You did not come as that sky? Is sky? In fact, for all cultivators who had stepped into this realm, no matter where they were in the main world, as long as they used their heart to feel, they would be able to feel the existence of the interior realm. You can go back to sky, but you must know your limits. Don't leave any traces behind. Otherwise, you will never be able to leave again. You only need to retreat before you enter the interior sky. When you return to the main world from the interior sky, focus your mind on the boundary you want to go to. When you leave the outer boundary of the interior sky, you will naturally arrive at the boundary you want to go to. Lu Xiaoyi was stunned. You 3 Pure Ones have studied the loopholes of the heavenly Tao so deeply. Qing Xian said proudly, of course. What do we do? Even if there are no holes, we have to poke a few holes. Not to mention, there are many loopholes. For example, when you come out of your splendid world, you can directly sense the position of the interior heaven and then go back up. I'll tell you all about it later, as well as some of the tricks of the 3 Pure Ones. Haven't you always been proud of your magic arts? It's easy. When you're close to the interior sky, stop and turn back. You're very familiar with the 5 rings, anchor chain, and Zhou starry sky environment, so it's not difficult to visualize. You can reach these 3 places very quickly. It won't take much time. The trouble is those places you have never been to. You can't visualize them because you don't know the specific starry sky environment. You can only fly by yourself. Therefore, I estimate that 5 rings, anchor chain, Zhou and Heaven's Choice are not a problem. But Luo Sutian, Yongding, Fuchun, and Guangming are more troublesome. You need to set the best route for yourself to save the most time. The two took out the star map and compared it carefully. The only advantage was that the marching monk and the bird had given them specific star map directions. They did not need to fly all the way to find them. Qing Xian looked carefully and sneered, Yongding, Fuchun, and Guangguang's path are all fine. It's just Luo Sutian. Hee, I guess this isn't the marching monk's lair. This is to prevent us from stealing his lair. Lu Xiaoyi nodded. Of course. Luo Sutian may be an important contact point for the Buddhism of the main world. It's okay. Take it slow. We can always find out the details. Qing Xian hesitated for a moment and decided to tell the truth. Xiaoyi, I have a feeling that this time, we have completed the matter of Hengyi realm too smoothly. This is not a good thing. I will not have any big changes in interior realm. But if you go to the main world, it will be hard to say. In theory, only you can go out of interior realm. But we have been cultivating for many years. We know that there are many things in the cultivation world, but there is no one. If you can go out, there must be others who can go out too. I can't judge how far the news will spread, but it probably won't spread to Hengyi realm. Because no one will be stupid enough to have anything to do with a ship that is doomed to sink. Maybe the trouble will come from other aspects. Maybe it will come from within us. Maybe it will come from your sword vein, including us, the 3 Pure Ones. The great thing that your crow ancestor did 10,000 years ago is now in full swing. It is impossible for others not to see through it and associate it with it. You are not an orthodox Taoist nor a Buddhist. You are not a short-lived character from some unorthodox orthodoxy. You are a swordsman, a sword vein. Many of the troubles in the future have nothing to do with other things. It is only related to your birth. Be careful. I am not too worried about your life, but I am worried that you will create some unmanageable situation. She stared at Lu Xiaoyi. The time when you can really let yourself go should be in the later part of the end of the universe's transformation. At that time, demons, ghosts, and heroes will fight for supremacy. That will be the time when you are unscrupulous. It is still too early now. Tuck your tail between your legs or put it in front of you. Haven't you always been thinking about your senior sisters? While you are still alive, don't leave any regrets. At the same time, let others see that you still have 7 emotions and 6 desires and that you still have weaknesses. Even if you have to pretend, you have to pretend. Chapter 1748. Somewhere in the interior's heaven, 2 people were playing chess under the pine trees on the mountainside. The chess game was in full swing. Although the attacks were not intense, various arrangements were intricate and complicated, revealing their true intentions. After a while, the young man admitted defeat. This was Yai. They could not really kill until the smoke of war was everywhere, and the corpses were piled up. For people with cultivation like them, it was a kind of propriety. They were particular about stopping at a certain point and leaving room for maneuver. The older Taoist took a sip of tea and commented, "Little Li's chess skills are good, and his thinking is unconventional. Every time he has a strange peak, it's amazing. However, going too far is as bad as not going far enough. Sometimes you have to fight when it's time to fight." The young Taoist bowed and accepted the advice. The old Taoist sighed. "My lineage of silence has been low-key since the beginning of our inheritance. It's been like this for tens of thousands of years, so it's become a habit. We're good at planning but lack practice. It doesn't matter on normal days, but when the universe changes, it's a big taboo. Planning can't solve everything. Bravery can't solve everything. When you're dormant, you're calculating the general trend. When you attack, you're striking like a thunderbolt. That's the real thing." The young man nodded. "It's just that the opponent is so strong that it's suffocating. Little Li can't beat him now, so he can only plan more and act less. Maybe in the future, he won't be able to change this situation." The old Taoist nodded. "You're careful and cautious. You've never been rash and greedy. At your age and level, who doesn't hide their pride and think of themselves as a great Taoist? It's good that you're able to keep your temper and know where your shortcomings are. However, fellow Taoists should be wary. The trend of the great Tao is gradually becoming clear, and what should be fought for must be fought for. Competitors can't be allowed to be unscrupulous. This is also a kind of comparison. One grows and the other weakens, and they can't coexist. You're better than other great Tao competitors because you know who your opponent is. In the universe's cultivation world, there won't be a third person who wants to encompass all 36 great Taos. The enemy is in the light, and I'm in the dark. It's a good opportunity for you to plan. When everyone knows about each other, planning will be useless. What's more important is your own strength. I hope that before that, you'll have dealt with your competitors." The young man nodded complacently. The old Taoist was still worried. "Little Li, your realm is the lowest in the interior heaven. You're only a Yin spirit. Although your potential is limitless, your current strength is limited. This is both a good and a bad thing. It all depends on how you use it. We can't be merciful when fighting for the great Tao. Even if the silent word's lineage has nothing to do with the sword vein, we can't stay out of the great Tao. Remember this. Remember this. You were able to comprehend the Tao during the process of the collapse of the great Tao. This is the favor of the heavens. For so many eras, no one in my lineage has ever had such an opportunity. It is time for the lineage of the silent speech to prosper. With the opportunity before us, we cannot be indecisive." The young man was actually a little impatient in his heart, but in front of the elders, he couldn't say anything. He could only change the topic. His Tao realm is not groundless. He can deceive others, but he can't deceive me. He should have also passed all 12 Tao realms, but I don't know what the next step will be. There is only one point. In the future, the 36 innate great Taos will definitely be gathered. This is also my direction. In this process, there may be some opportunities. Of course, I will work on both sides, and I won't avoid the most direct way of killing. The old Taoist was very pleased. His whereabouts have been confirmed. Left and right are the places where those realms go. There are not many realms where we can use our strength. For safety reasons, there are only 2 realms where we are most confident. My lineage of the silent words has some hidden connections there. You have to use them carefully. There is only one premise. Whether the matter succeeds or not is secondary. Don't reveal your secrets. This is the most important thing. The young man said goodbye. Ancestor Yen, I'm leaving. It's also troublesome to go out. It will take time. The old Taoist waved his hand. The wings have been formed. It's time to spread them and fly high. I'll wait for your good news. Lu Xiaoyi flew slowly in the interior realm, in the direction where he first entered the interior realm. When he first appeared, the nearest immortal was called the Hidden Dragon. However, all the immortals in the interior realm changed. So now he could not follow the Hidden Dragon. Instead, he had to find a location where the Hidden Dragon was in the interior realm. Relatively speaking, this was easier than finding a certain immortal. He was touched by Qing Xian's last words. This was a friend's words from the bottom of his heart. He could not ignore it. Where the danger would come from, he had his own judgment. In fact, what was on the table was nothing, including the marching monks group. The real danger came from the schemes behind his back, the enemies he did not know about. A tall tree attracts the wind. People are afraid of being famous. At this point, he knew very well how many envious and jealous eyes there would be behind his back. People would not fawn over you just because you were great. As Qing Xian said, he would never be able to get rid of the threat of his sword vein. There were countless cultivators in the universe, the main world, half-immortals, immortals. Even if these mighty people could not go down to the main world, he should not be naive enough to think that they could not exert their influence. They could, and they definitely existed. He just could not see it. However, this wouldn't stop him. Only in this process could he truly grow. There were some things that you couldn't avoid. He did not let anyone accompany him. Qing Xian, Beifeng, everyone had their own paths. However, others' paths were relatively peaceful, while his was bumpy. He had no choice. If he wanted to eat all 36 dishes, he had to pay something. Soon, he found the place where he first entered. It was no different from the other places in the interior realm. However, there was a new immortal nearby, an unfamiliar one. Faintly, there was a reverberating chi circling in the mountain. There was a mighty power that seemed to want to break through the interior realm. It looked like a mountain from afar, but when he thought about it carefully, it felt like a sword. There was a singing voice, picked up the broken sore head, not knowing why. Grasping the tail of a green snake, a few inches of a green peak. Suspected to be a whale salamander, not a dragon. Missing in the soil, abandoned by no one to collect. I have a disdainful nature, strong and not soft. Do not be light, a straight broken sword is better than a curved hook. Lu Xiaoyi was silent and immersed in it. He let his mind fly in this unruly sword will. There was no resistance, only appreciation, feeling, and resonance. The sword was always straight. This was not only the shape, but it also represented many things. It was the expression of a swordsman's sword will, the firmness of his state of mind, and the persistence of a lifetime. He did not say anything, but it seemed like he had said countless words. After a long silence, the sword's humming gradually stopped. Lu Xiaoyi stretched out his hand, and a 3-inch broken sword had appeared in his palm. There was a familiar breath in it. Only he who had been to the Sword Tao tablet could understand it. He bowed and did not say anything. His body slammed backward and disappeared from the interior realm. Chapter 1749. Lu Xiaoyi appeared in the passage again. He knew very well why he could come out. It was because he didn't leave his name in the interior sky. This was the benefit of going through the back door. Before leaving the interior sky, he saw Chong Lu. In fact, he just felt the aura of Lu Zu's sword. He knew that his every move in the interior sky was under Lu Zu's watch. Although Lu Zu didn't say it, he could guess that Lu Zu was currently in a rather awkward situation. This was something that a half-immortal with a limited lifespan had to go through. He didn't know what method Lu Zu would use to pass this trial. This wasn't something he should care about. The meaning of the broken sword was clear. Xian Yuan was handed over to him. He was as irresponsible as Crow Zu. Lu Xiaoyi was very angry. If I didn't come, who would you hand over Xian Yuan to? Or let nature take its course and perish on its own? In theory, he should actually call Chong Lu Sr. This was still the pride of a swordsman. He didn't blame himself for taking over Xuan Yuan's responsibility, but would it kill him to say more? Or did the senior already acquiesce to his actions? He only thought it was the latter because the longest tradition of Xian Yuan was whoever spoke in the era. This was Lu Xiaoyi's era, not Chong Lu's, not Crow Zu's. His idea was very simple. Since it was handed over to him, of course, he would do it according to his idea. You can poop and not wipe your ass, but how to wipe it, whether you use paper, bamboo, or pants to wipe it, I have the final say. His mood relaxed, and he was a little complacent. Nearly 2,000 years ago, when he was robbed of the most fierce sword vein in the universe, how could he have thought that he would be able to control it one day? With this thought, he bumped into the dense fog and became immortal again. The affairs of the world were so unpredictable. When he was sealed as immortal for the first time, he thought that if he had such an experience again, he would definitely carry more meat and wine. However, when he really had this second experience, he had long forgotten about these appetites. After entering the passage, the path was vaguely discernible. Other than the numerous cracks that had appeared over the years, the Dafa's direction was still there, so they would not get lost. Just like that, he ran all the way into the depths. Although he had 100 or 200 years, he knew that he could not afford to waste even a single day. If all the domains were notified, how many people would come? This was an unimaginable number, but it would probably crush Henghe. People like Lu Xiaoyi and Qing Xian would never care about fairness. What they loved the most was to kill a chicken with a butcher's knife. In the process, they would display the cohesiveness of Taoism and fight against the Buddhists of the origin world. He was just an appetizer. The real battle was still far away. When he came, he spent a year in this passage, but that was under the guidance of the 3 Qin sword spirits. Now that he was returning alone, it was more troublesome. Even if he hurried, he still spent a year and a half in this kind of maze before he finally saw a ray of sword light. That was Bei Ho, viciously killing the insect beasts. However, he did not expect a familiar face to appear behind the insect beasts. Junior Martial Brother Lu. You're finally here. You've been gone for so many years, and the senior Martial brothers have been quite worried. Lu Xiaoyi said with a smile, Why are you back again? I thought you were going to wander around outside for a long time. Bei Ho was embarrassed. I'm ashamed. Since I've merged with the sword spirits, my memories are a little unclear. I only realized later and immediately returned to do my duty. However, Junior Martial Brother has been burdened by me. It's really a sin. Lu Xiaoyi waved his hand. What's there to be ashamed of? This is also an opportunity, and I was fortunate enough to meet fellow Daoist Shi Zhao and explore the secrets of the passage. And you came back so quickly, so you definitely can't go to Xian Yuan. What about Radiant Light? Bei Ho laughed. Radiant Light is still on the anchor chain. If the other domain envoys don't leave, of course they don't dare to leave. They're just wasting their time like this. Lu Xiaoyi was a little puzzled. Heaven's Eyes didn't send anyone else? Can the 5 of you handle it? Bei Ho asked back. We didn't send anyone. Although there are more branches and more cracks, there are no more zombies, so the pressure is even lower. Junior Martial Brother Lu, tell me the truth. Did you dig out the zombie space in the ancient battlefield? Lu Xiaoyi played it down. I was lucky. I ran into it. Take me to see the senior Martial brothers. Bei Ho didn't say anything and led him away. The worries of the 5 Martial brothers over the years were finally gone, and they didn't have to bear too much, even if it actually had nothing to do with them. Soon, the few of them met. Even such experienced people couldn't hide their joy from the bottom of their hearts. After a brief exchange, Lu Xiaoyi said goodbye. We should be in the same boat, but I have important matters to attend to, so I can't accompany you. I need to take my leave first. I only hope that the few of you can keep your useful bodies and don't abandon your sword bodies. When the era changes, you can also join in the fun. The few Shizhao swordsmen raised their hands and bid farewell. They didn't ask him to stay, nor did they ask anything. Only when the person left did Bei Ho complain. Senior Martial Brother. Junior Martial Brother Lu must have gone to the inner and outer scenic sky. Otherwise, with his ability, it's impossible for him to return after so many years. Where did he go? You didn't even let me ask. We're already like this. What's there to worry about? Bei Ho glared. Don't ask what you shouldn't ask. Junior Martial Brother Lu can enter because he meets the conditions to enter. If you go there, you'll be throwing your life away. Have you forgotten what happened to the few of you more than 10,000 years ago? Bei Ho wasn't afraid of this senior martial brother. I just want to know if junior martial brother Lu went in? It makes my heart itch. If he really went in, would it be an interior or an exterior? Bei Ho looked at the few junior martial brothers who were also full of interest and sighed. Actually, all of you have guessed it. You're just asking me for peace of mind. He must have gone in, otherwise he wouldn't have left in such a hurry. It must be an interior. Is there a future in the exterior now? What we need to pay attention to is his last sentence. The great change is imminent. The most important thing is to keep a useful body and wait for the right time. If anyone can't persevere in the last few thousand years, then it's a real injustice. Because you're likely to fall before dawn. This is what he wants to tell us. There's only hope if we survive. The few hearts that had been calm for tens of thousands of years began to feel restless. In fact, they also knew that the change of the era was their only hope. Even if they could never reach the upper realm, being able to freely travel in the universe with their swords was their wish that they had looked forward to for countless years. Perhaps they could do more. After the change of the era, the beautiful world would definitely exist, but the interior and exterior might not. Even if it existed, there would definitely be earth-shaking changes. Then, was there any meaning in defending the passage? If there was a great change in the upper realm, would their past mistakes be forgotten? If the universe was in chaos, who would pay attention to the few remaining Shizhao members? Chapter 1750. Lu Xiaoyi leaped out of the passage and immediately felt some kind of summon. It was a summon from the heavenly eyes, a reminder after the completion of the mission. He answered with his heart and passed on his faith. The next moment, he was lifted out of the atmosphere by an inexplicable force. It could be said that he had completed the reincarnation of the mission. Did he not know the result of the mission? He did not know the evaluation of the heavenly eyes either. He did not care too much about this. He thought that he had already realized that if he used the power of the heavenly eyes endlessly, it would bring trouble to himself and his friends with Ling Bao. There was no need for that. He now had his own way of running errands. He just hoped that Qing Xian's method was reliable. Once he was out of the Qi layer, the seal automatically disappeared. The true spirit of the Jinxiu deity was too lazy to greet him. It meant that he could do as he pleased. He bowed in the air and flew away. Soon he left the Jinxiu world. However, he did not go far because he had to find a way to travel around the universe through the interior sky. Previously, he could not feel the existence of the interior sky because he had not built the superego future. Therefore, he was only a primordial spirit and not a demi-immortal. Of course, he could not feel the existence of the interior sky. Now that he had built the superego future, he was a genuine one-step demi-immortal. The mystery of the universe naturally appeared in his senses. He shook his body and merged into the void. He stabilized his real body, guarded his primordial spirit, restrained his mana, and activated his spirit. Everything was ready. His mind instantly sank into his superego future and then hit the void of the universe with his superego future. Suddenly, a strange scene formed in his mind. The starry sky was no longer a starry sky. It was as if the universe had turned into two colors. One was the black he was in now, and the other was the indescribable white. He knew that the white was the place he was looking for, the interior sky. This was a mysterious feeling. What he needed to do now was to follow this mysterious feeling and fly up to the white light. He kept flying, Lu Xiaoyi kept flying. In this state of the space of consciousness, the concept of time had lost its meaning. It might have been a long time, like countless years, or it might have been a short time, but he could not make an effective judgment. He was afraid that he could only have a complete understanding after coming out of the interior heaven. Finally, he felt a kind of pressure. It was like a swamp, soft and sticky. It was not affected by the power of any spell. If he wanted to pass through, he could only use his cultivation base to force his way in. It was a bit like the great membrane of heaven and earth. However, the great membrane of heaven and earth had a repulsive force. There was no repulsive force here. This was even more dangerous, because if one didn't break through the heaven and earth great membrane, they would be ejected by it. But here, when one had no strength, they would only be trapped and let this layer of stickiness surround and oppress them, making them unable to move, breathe, or use any teleportation until they died, when their body dissolved into a part of this layer of stickiness. To pass through this kind of barrier, decisiveness was very important. If one was confident enough, then they would rush in without hesitation. Don't think about the return journey after using up more than half of your strength. Just think that you can pass through the membrane in the next step. Once you feel that you can't hold on for too long and retreat, you will die without a doubt, because it is impossible to maintain the shortest and most direct route back. If one was decisive enough to retreat immediately after seeing this kind of barrier, then not only would one successfully leave the interior sky barrier, but they would also lose the touch of future and return to the main world space. In short, one's mind had to be firm, determined, fearless, and keep moving forward. One could not look left and right and choose a new direction because of doubt. Lu Xiaoyi's problem was more troublesome. It was not a problem that could be solved by being firm enough. His problem was the sense of propriety. He wanted to retreat at the moment when he was about to enter the interior sky so that he could achieve the effect of teleportation in the void of the main world. This sense of propriety was unfamiliar to him since it was his first time walking through the main door. His grasp of the sense of propriety was not precise enough. If he went too deep and really entered the interior sky, he would be recognized by the interior sky. Then, he would be like Qing Xian and the others, unable to come out temporarily. Even if he walked through the heavenly passage, he would not be able to come out because he was already in the interior sky. It would not work even if he entered too shallow, because the interior sky barrier had not given him the signal to choose the specific location of the main world space. If he retreated now, he would most likely return to the vicinity of Jinxiu world, wasting his efforts. As Qing Xian said, when a half-immortal came out of the interior sky, there would be a very short process for you to choose the starry sky you wanted to return to. This choice was not a matter of where you wanted to go. You had to have been there before, be able to provide the accurate structure of the star map, and have a trace of your breath in that starry sky. In short, the interior genius would only move you to a place you had been to and was familiar with. It was not a problem that could be solved by just relying on hearsay and the name of a boundary. There were many places like this for him, such as the Five Rings, Qingkong, Zhou-Xian, and Anchor Chain. These were all places he could go. Before he could feel the wonderful position shift of the interior sky, he could only squeeze his way in. At the same time, he used the 3 Pure Ones secret technique Qing Xian taught him, wall riding technique, to sense if he had arrived at the right place. Wall riding technique: 1 step in was an intruder, 1 step out was a passerby. The name was very appropriate, but it was a little strange. When he first learned this technique, Qing Xian spent a lot of effort. He had cultivated for almost 2,000 years, but he had never seen such a stupid cultivator. No matter how he taught, it did not work. He was forgetful and was not humble at all. He talked back and thought himself infallible. It was a simple supplement technique. If it were any other Taoist, they would only need to say a few words and not have to repeat it a second time. But who would have thought that this so-called magical genius would have to study it for 3 whole days before he could barely master it? Now, Lu Xiaoyi was using his spell genius ability to force himself in the membrane. He was trembling with fear, afraid that the technique would break again, and he would rush into the interior sky. Fortunately, such a mistake did not happen. The secret skill of the 3 pure ones was undoubtedly effective. After some hard work, Lu Xiaoyi finally felt that he had entered a certain level by relying on the wall-riding skill. This was also a very dangerous place. One more step, and he would enter the interior heaven. He stopped and released his consciousness. At the same time, he visualized the vast starry sky of the 5 rings. He withdrew the beyond self-touch in his consciousness. He felt his body become light, and he was pushed out of the sticky substance. After returning to the origin world, he looked around again. In the distance, a huge domain was slowly flying under the starry sky. This was a domain that he would never forget. 700 years after leaving the Zhou Xian, he had returned to his homeland. But it was different from his idea of flying back alone. Chapter 1751. Of course, if he had to choose the 5th ring, he could only choose the 5th ring. Because the first thing he had to consider was to give the furthest boundary enough time to cross the void. There were no demi-immortals among them, so they couldn't rush like him. They could only fly all the way, which required time. Among all the boundaries he had to inform, the 5th ring was the furthest, followed by Luo Sutian and Yangding.
They were not even on the same line.
Then it was Heaven's Choice and Zhou Xian. These 2 positions were relatively close to each other. Finally, it was the scattered anchor chain, floating sink, and light. These 3 places were relatively scattered and difficult to find, but they were relatively close to the Hung River. They were the last boundaries to go to. In fact, even with the interior sky as a springboard, this was still a very time-consuming and energy-consuming task. This was because there were a few realms that he could not reach through the interior sky. For example, Luo Sutian and Yangding could only fly through the 5th ring with his physical body. In the same situation, Fu Shun and Ming Ming could only start from the anchor chain. These were places that he had never been to before. Most of his time would be wasted on these 4 boundaries. Among the 16 young demi-immortals of Eastern Sky in the interior sky, there were still some who didn't ask him to bring his own sect to participate in such activities. Basically, they were not strong enough and did not have such ambition. For this reason, Lu Xiaoyi designed the best theoretical route for himself. First, he would return to the 5th ring and settle the allocation of people as soon as possible. He would directly go to Zhou Xian in the interior sky and complete the agreement with Bai Mei and the others. He would enter the negative space and enter Heaven's Choice. He would pull Heaven's Choice into his group and contact the ancient beasts. The beasts would use their own methods to unite the ancient sacred beasts, especially the Black Dragon clan. Then, he would return to the 5th ring through the interior sky and set off to Luo Sutian and Yangding. He would still use the interior sky to go to the anchor chain and then complete the final contact with floating sink and light. This was the conclusion drawn from the star map. The core principle was to first go to the farthest place from the Hung River and then go down in order. He had also considered whether he should send a few more people through the 5th ring and the anchor chain to inform them, but after careful consideration, he gave up on the idea. Other than him, it was difficult for anyone else to convince them with their own qualifications. Lu Xiaoyi had an outstanding reputation, formidable strength, the fact that he had taken a step forward, and the keepsakes of the monstrous geniuses from various domains. Lu Xiaoyi's status in the universe master world, especially in the Eastern Sky, was incomparable to others. There were many things that he could do that others might not be able to do. This was an indisputable fact. If he rashly sent someone unrelated to him, there would be countless troubles. How was he supposed to wipe his ass? He had no choice but to work alone. There was nothing he could do. While he was thinking, he had already crashed into the atmosphere of the 5th ring. The cultivators on guard in the sky had no time to react. Looking at this person rashly crashing into the dome of the Western Domain, they understood what kind of person he was. The swordsman was always in such a hurry. He didn't have much time to communicate with his sun god senior brothers one by one. Things like this, he had to be decisive and directly suppress it. If he talked too much, it would become an analysis of the general trend of the universe. There would also be countless arguments. He only had a mouth, and his qualifications were very insufficient. He might not be able to win a battle of words with a group of cultivators. He directly landed on Crow Peak. He didn't even need to release a flying sword to send a message. Just the momentum of his landing had already shaken the entire dome. For a moment, sword light frequency rose. Above the monarch level, he directly went to Crow Peak. The Yuanying swordsman wandered outside the peak. His heart was itching, but he couldn't enter without permission. It was still very neat. In fact, in the entire universe's cultivation world, most of the top forces stayed on the mother planet. They wouldn't leave unless there was a major event, only to deal with possible changes. This was especially true in the Fifth Ring. After experiencing a great battle, and under the circumstances of there being bound to be other great battles, it was normal for great cultivators to hide and not come out. Guandu, Zhizhong, Heku, Gongyao, Guangbua, Shangting, and the inner sword Guanshan that didn't make it in time for the last great battle were Xuanyuan sun gods. There were even more primordial soul supremes, Lefeng, Guangming, Zhoufan, Songrong, and the others. Needless to say, the Yin gods included Lu Xiaoyi's sword soldier army, Banju, and the others. There were also his senior sisters, Yendai, Yanchen, and his junior sister, Huang Xiaoya. But he couldn't say anything now. He had to pay attention to the situation. For more than 10,000 years in the dome, except for Chonglu, no one dared to use their sword on Crow Peak. That was courting death. Even the last Buddhist attack wasn't serious to this extent. However, Lu Xiaoyi didn't understand this. The Crow ancestor, who was regarded as a god by the swordsman, was just an irresponsible and reckless person who didn't wipe his butt clean. Therefore, he didn't care at all. But he didn't care, but the other swordsmen might not. Therefore, the swordsmen who came here were very curious. What was this lunatic trying to do? If there wasn't a reasonable explanation for his reckless behavior, they were afraid that he would be punished. No matter how much he contributed to Xianyuan, no matter how much he contributed, could he be more important than the Crow ancestor? However, the performance of Guandu and several other Yang gods surprised the primordial soul and Yin gods. They saw Guandu lead the Yang gods to pay their respects by bowing, but he didn't blame them at all. What was going on? In fact, Lu Xiaoyi was also a little confused. He was still thinking about how to persuade these unruly ancestors from before. It turned out that these big bosses in the dome were more tactful than he thought. They must have realized something. He turned his body and said, "What's going on? Are you all confused?" Little E came back this time to conspire with the senior brothers, not to become the big boss in the dome. Guandu was a very serious person and never joked. The broken sword descends to the mortal world, and the dome will be the leader. Junior brother Lu, have you seen the Lu ancestor? So, if you have anything to say, we dare not to disobey. Lu Xiaoyi understood that each family had their own tricks. The broken sword head should have belonged to the Crow ancestor, and it had been held by Chonglu. In fact, it was something like the leader's token of Xianyuan, but this thing was more powerful than the so-called token. At the beginning, the Crow ancestor had passed it down to Chonglu, and now Chonglu had passed it down to Lu Xiaoyi. In fact, it meant one thing. Whoever held it would be in charge. There was no discussion and no public opinion. This was the tradition of Xianyuan since the Crow ancestor, which magnified personal ability to the extreme. This broken sword head must have some connection with the dome, so as soon as Lu Xiaoyi appeared, at least the Yang gods understood what it meant. Lu Xiaoyi laughed dryly and said, "Actually, I didn't see senior brother Lu. That guy hid in the interior and didn't see anyone. He was shy, so he sang a song and gave me this broken sword head of the Crow ancestor. Just like that, I fell into a trap. Don't mind it. I'm too lazy to care about this, but I have a small goal in fighting." As soon as everyone heard this, they all understood that Lu Xiaoyi had sneaked out after going to the interior. This ability was not something that the people present could do, because it meant that he had taken a step. What did it mean to take a step at this age? It meant that his goal must be to become a Jinxian. After more than 10,000 years, Xianyuan finally had another person who was ready to break through the sky. No wonder the Lu ancestor gave him the broken sword head. If it was given to someone else who could bear it. Chapter 1752. Guandu is still serious. Whoever holds the broken sword will be in charge of Xianyuan. We can do the small things, but the big things must be decided by the sword master. Junior brother now has a great responsibility on his shoulders. You can't be as sloppy as before, wandering around the world without any direction. Well, he hadn't even worn the crown yet, and someone was already talking. Xianyuan's swordsman's actions were the same, but he wouldn't hold back his words. Maybe it wasn't like this when Crow Ancestor was around, but that was the pressure of countless battle achievements. In this aspect, Lu Xiaoyi was still far behind. But there were also flatterers, such as He Chu, the one who once bribed him with the inner sword sun spirit. Of course, there was no distinction between inner and outer swords now. Now on Crow Peak, there was no one carrying a sword case. Everyone had their flying swords in their bodies, and their combat power had increased by a lot. Junior brother is wise and has great foresight. Our sword veins actions should be clean and efficient. We haven't done anything big all these years. It's really suffocating. What's the target you mentioned? I'll go arrange for people. Everyone turned to look at him. Most of them knew the personality of the new leader of the dome. He was never idle. With him in charge, at least one thing was certain, and that was that there would be a lot of fights. Morale could be used. Lu Xiaoyi didn't waste any words. He raised his hand and displayed a star map. It was rough, but it marked the approximate location of most of the big worlds in the eastern sky, as well as a few other places in the northern sky, such as Zhou. He pointed at a world and asked, "Here. Who knows this?" The people of Xianyuan were a little confused. Although they were considered the most ambitious group of people in the universe, few people could travel a distance of hundreds of years. After all, not everyone was Lu Xiaoyi. But there were some who knew. Guandu's eyes focused. Hengyi Realm. Everyone's mood instantly soared. What kind of place was Hengyi Realm? Although no one had ever been there, they were all familiar with its name. It was one of the most famous realms in the eastern sky. In terms of status in the cultivation world, it wasn't any worse than the Fifth Ring realm. It was just that it was very low-key, but in terms of history, it was several galaxies ahead of the Fifth Ring realm. To the swordsman, a real battle would require a real opponent. They had destroyed a few Buddhist realms after the Great War of the Five Rings, but to be honest, the strength of their opponents was not even worth mentioning. Therefore, they did not have much interest in fighting them, and there was not much thrill in fighting them. But the Hengyi realm was different. That was a great expedition that required the strength of the entire Five Rings, and it was so far away that it would take hundreds of years just to fly there. But this was not something they should be thinking about. Lu Xiaoyi asked again, "How much do we know about the Hengyi realm's role in the Fifth Ring War?" Looking at the hesitant Guandu, Lu Xiaoyi dispelled his doubts. "It's okay, there's no need to keep it a secret. Many things are no longer a secret in the interior sky." Guandu said in a low voice, "According to our investigation over the past few hundred years, Zerg and the Winged Men's participation in the war was inevitably due to a conspiracy behind the scenes, and it wasn't entirely the Buddhist sect of the main world. Our target of suspicion is the Hengyi realm, including the Three Pure Ones and the Supreme Ones, but we don't have any evidence. They are very thorough in their work and did not leave any loopholes." Lu Xiaoyi nodded and waved his hand. "That's it. What evidence? We'll look for evidence after the war. When did Xianyuan catch a thief red-handed? It's always been killing and framing." Guandu heard him being so unbridled and coughed to the side, implying that he should restrain himself. They were all decent people. Lu Xiaoyi didn't keep him in suspense. They were all supremes, and he didn't want to create a so-called small circle and control the plan among the so-called high-level young gods. He preferred to treat everyone equally. It would be a joke if there were spies among the supremes. Limited by the distance, the scale of the battle is limited to young gods and fifth ring young gods. The rest of you will guard the rear. Don't fight like a wolf. We don't have that much time. The Supremes complained, and their dissatisfaction increased greatly. But in fact, if they thought about it carefully, it made sense to only send out young god Supremes. After all, the distance was too far. If they covered the sky and earth, any news would be leaked. With the young god of the third ring Supremes as the leader, in terms of speed alone, a pure young god team would be very fast. Only then would they be able to arrive in the shortest time possible. The universe was chaotic, and it was impossible for everyone to leave empty-handed. There had to be someone left behind. Guandu was very cautious. The fifth ring only has young gods. Isn't it too weak? He is very strong and good at hiding his strength. His young gods alone should be close to 100. There are also various conveniences for fighting on the ground. There are even more primordial spirit cultivators. If it's just a fifth ring young god, even if all of them are sent out, I'm afraid I can only defeat them. And this is under the premise of a successful sneak attack. Lu Xiaoyi decided, no, this is not a fifth ring solo operation but a big operation of the eastern sky and the northern sky. At that time, many domains will join, including the Buddhist sects of the main world. So my opinion is that we only need to send out no more than half of our young gods. Hometown is very important, and you can't take all the glory for something like this, can you? If no one has any objections, I ask Senior Marshal Brother Guandu to issue a fifth ring assembly order and summon a few big sects to make arrangements. Guandu immediately dismissed the Supremes, leaving only the young god and a few of the most powerful primordial spirit Supremes. Then, he carefully communicated with Lu Xiaoyi. He couldn't help but praise this grand plan. At the same time, he was also shocked by the abilities of those evildoers in the interior realm. It was this group of so-called young people who decided the life and death of a big world in a game. It was really terrifying. Although he was a little unwilling, he still knew that his era had passed. Now was the era of lawlessness. Fortunately, Xianyuan never lacked lawless people. The assembly order could only be issued by the three big powers in the fifth ring. This time, Xianyuan issued the highest level purple ring order. The purple ring order on the dome was issued, and in less than 10 breaths, a large number of young gods came one after another. It could be imagined that the current situation in the fifth ring was relaxed on the outside but tense on the inside. Everyone was preparing, and no one was relaxed. There were not many sects qualified to receive the purple ring order. Basically, they were all important figures in the fifth ring. In addition to the three pure ones, Supreme and Xianyuan, there were less than 10 sects such as Jiaolan Oracle, Chimanduanjia, Dafa Star, Wanjing Sect, Weijian Mountain, and Firmament Sword Sect. But together, they accounted for more than half of the fifth ring's power. When they arrived at Qingyang Mountain, they saw a group of Xuanyuan's higher-ups clustered around a young primordial spirit cultivator. Most of them were confused, but there were also cunning old foxes. The old Taoist Qing Yangzi squeezed over. Little friend Lu, we meet again. Do you have any orders for us to run errands? I'll make it clear here. Little friend Lu's arrangement is the three pure ones arrangement. There's no difference. Chapter 1753. The surrounding Taoists were very disdainful. It was disgusting for a leader of the three pure ones to be so pretentious, but it also represented a trend. The mainstream of the five rings finally realized that this era was no longer their era. It was a trend to give way to the younger generation, and no one could change it. Wushang Chongjin mocked from the side. Why don't you let this kid be the leader of the three pure ones as well? It'll save you the trouble of frowning all day. You can go home and plant some flowers and grass. Lu Xiaoyi was natural and unrestrained, without the arrogance of a petty person intoxicated by success, nor the restraint of a cautious person. Senior Qing Yangzi, Qing Xian asked me to pass you a message. For this cooperation, don't hold back. The universe is changing, and we have to do our best. If you keep hiding, you'll grow hair and mold. Qing Yangzi raised his eyebrows. Qing Xian dares to say that to me? I think you're the one trying to sow discord. You're bullying me because I can't go up. Chang Jin sighed. The young man is right. Holding back is an old habit of the three pure ones. It's a tradition of hundreds of thousands of years. You can't wait to save half of your shit just in case. Sigh. Even the three pure ones of Xianyuan have gone up, but I, Wushang, can't keep up with the situation. I can only let you two make the decision this time. You two put in more effort, and Wushang can just stay on the sidelines. How could Qing Yangzi allow him to back down? Chang Jin, don't try this on me. You have a young spirit called Shiyuan Wushang, right? He's also taken a step, right? It's just that he hasn't reached that place yet. Why are you acting pitiful here? I'm old, but I'm not blind. Chang Jin wasn't embarrassed by being exposed at all. He only looked at Lu Xiaoyi curiously. Little friend, this decision was made by the group of young people up there. Of course, you and that kid Qing Xian instigated it. Nobody from Wushang participated in the conspiracy. Am I right? Lu Xiaoyi smiled and nodded. Of course not. But from what I think, our decision should also be Brother Shi's decision. There shouldn't be any difference. We're all from the same generation, so there shouldn't be too much of a difference. Chang Jin rolled his old eyes. Are you threatening me, kid? If Shi doesn't agree, you won't recognize him? Just because of that, he was seen as an alien? Are they going to suppress and isolate us? Lu Xiaoyi did not evade the question. Suppression and isolation might not necessarily be too light. There is a high probability that he will be taught a lesson until he accepts everyone's goodwill. Chang Jin pointed at Guandu. Brother Guan, the young man under you is threatening me. Guandu knew his character, so he ignored him. Beside him, Qing Yangzi laughed and said, So, what if I'm threatening you? Threatening you is already a light punishment for not respecting your elders. I'm just holding back, but you old men are so stingy. The three tycoons of the fifth ring had been making up for the gap between them all these years. They were all cunning old foxes and knew all too well what the fifth ring needed right now. If a crack appeared within the fifth ring during this period, it would truly be a hopeless situation. The other sects looked on enviously, but there was nothing they could do. Who asked their own disciples to not produce any amazing characters? What is a leader and a group of people? This is it. 3 people, Lu Xiaoyi, Qing Xian, and Shiyu. As long as one of them could succeed in the end, the fifth ring would not have to worry about anything for 10,000 years. Unfortunately, the competition was still between the 3 tycoons. The foundation of the inheritance once again showed its incomparably huge inertia. The 2 leaders of the Orthodox Taoist sect jested and settled this gathering. In one sentence, everyone would listen to the young people. Actually, they would listen to the young people. This was the general trend, so they had no choice but to go with the flow. Lu Xiaoyi was concise and comprehensive. I only have one request. Since the next collapse of the Great Tao is in 1 to 200 years, I ask everyone to try to appear at the beast territory beside the Hengi Jia within 100 years as fast as possible. There will be peacocks and wild geese there to receive you, so you should be able to cover up a bit. During this period, there will be forces from other realms arriving. The beast territory will be the gathering point. Seniors are all experts in how to cover up your tracks. Little E doesn't need to say much. When the Great Tao collapses, we will begin to forcefully break through the Hengi Jia. It was a very grand plan from the hands of the young monsters. It was filled with an indomitable spirit. Because there were enough alliances, there was actually no need to worry about anything. After all, the law couldn't punish the masses. It was a little rough, but it was full of vitality. As for the specific links, only the old guys could check and fill in the gaps. It was impossible to completely destroy the Great Tao and destroy the realms all of a sudden. No realm would lower their guard against the defense of their home planet at this time. From this point of view, crushing the other realms with strength was the right path. Lu Xiaoyi was very modest. It's the sun spirit attack. Otherwise, we can't guarantee time. But how many people will go will still be up to you uncles and aunties to decide. In Little Yi's opinion, it shouldn't be more than half. This is an alliance, and the 5 rings shouldn't be too strong. We have to let the other realms have a process of adapting. When they're used to it, we will convince them with virtue. Under Guan Du's serious face, there was a surging heart. Because he saw the possibility of Xianyuan rising again. Not everyone could be a collar cuff. But this Lu Xiaoyi easily did it while he was laughing and scolding. To be able to pull back a group of people from Heaven's Choice Zhou Xian was just a small part of it. To be able to unify a group of arrogant young monsters into one direction in interior heaven was a test of one's ability. Now that he was back at the 5th ring, he was able to achieve the best effect with just a few words of nonsense that seemed to be out of place and had no sense of hierarchy. It made the uncles like Qin Yongzi and Chang Jin, as well as the aunties and aunties like Tong Yan obedient. This might be borrowing power, but if it was someone else, would they be able to do all this if you gave them this power? Too old-fashioned and serious, too mischievous and mischievous. This little guy had grasped the propriety of this to the point of perfection. He had truly combined his strength, fame, background, and battle record perfectly. Just based on this point, Guan Du would never be able to do it. None of the other Sun Spirit Junior brothers could do it either. None of the truly ambitious and ruthless people were normal and walked the normal path. Before, there was Crow Ancestor, and now there was this thing. Lu Ancestor's eyes were sharp. Perhaps it was because he saw this point that he did not hesitate to give the broken sword head to him. He did not know if Xianyuan would be reborn in this change of the universe and the change of the era. But if it was this person who led everyone, then at least they would be able to bloom brilliantly. Moreover, you would never know what the end of time was. Where could this little guy take everyone? The unknown was the best thing to look forward to. In this point, he and Crow Ancestor were the same kind of people. Chapter 1754. These uncles, grandpas, aunties, and aunties were truly shrewd with age. The most important thing in the first alliance was to complete it smoothly, not to show off the leadership of the 5th ring. This could easily cause others to dislike it. How could it be so easy for the major cultivators of the various realms to obediently obey the orders of a force that was originally on par with them? Therefore, not fighting was fighting. This required considering the number of young gods that the other realms might send. They might not necessarily have the most, but they must have more than the Buddhists of the main world. However, there was no need to compare them with a super-large realm like Heaven's Choice Zhou Xian. This was the first cooperation. If the process was pleasant and the results were satisfactory, there would definitely be a second and third time. Until everyone was familiar with the 5th ring's way of doing things, until everyone treated you as a part of the 5th ring group, regardless of whether you sincerely followed them or not, then the goal would be achieved. It was a moral kidnapping that couldn't be more natural. As expected of a little bandit from a bandit's nest. The old bandits were very satisfied. Since it was limited to the Yang God realm, the selection was actually very simple. One from the 5th ring, 200 Yang gods. Everyone knew each other well. From the consideration of compatibility, orthodoxy, the balance of the various sects, and so on, everyone came up with a list of 40 people in a few moments. Among them, there were a few who had really been to the beast territory, such as Xuanyuan's Guan Mountain. Their main strength was still in the 5th ring. This was their route. The people of the 5th ring acted decisively. This was also the tradition of bandits. There was nothing to prepare. Chang Jin represented the older generation of cultivators. We will set off in 2 hours. We will reach the beast territory within 100 years. Unless the collapse of the Great Tao is too early, you will see grandpas and aunties waiting for you there. Lu Xiaoyi jumped into the air and bowed. Hair as white as snow, not black hair. A bent body like a bow, with you bearing the weight. Hands like black wood, holding a child to send you off. Eyes like yellow pearls, with the tassels of time. The 5th ring has all these old farts, which is why there is today's wind in the universe. See you in 100 years. Seeing this little guy throw himself into outer space, Chang Jin sighed inwardly. If you compare yourself to others, you'll die. If you compare goods, you'll throw them away. There Shiyu lacked this kind of innate heroic spirit. Although Shiyu's realm was a level higher than this child's, he knew very well that in terms of future, he had already lost. Yet, this little fellow still made people unable to feel any hostility towards him. His sense of propriety revealed great wisdom. They couldn't help but ponder. This was actually the feeling of everyone present. Throughout the entire process, he didn't even use his sword once, but the sharpness that came from the soul aroused everyone's fighting spirit. The swordsmen had stirred up the Dharma cultivators' fighting spirit, and they wanted to charge forward without hesitation, even at the cost of their lives. Did the heavens have eyes? It had only been a few hours since he had returned to the fifth ring, but he had already subdued the dome and the fifth ring. Back when he was in Xianyuan, even Li Wuya's nascent soul did not seem to be able to do this. What was the difference? Yangzi of the three pure ones gave the answer. It's already hard enough to deal with a hooligan who's cultured, but he's also *king approachable. What should we do? In order to pretend to be weak, Lu Xiaoyi had no choice but to rush out of the atmosphere and start his interior heaven teleportation technique again. There was really no other way. The old guys had to set off in 2 hours, so how could he, a young man who had gathered them, waste time on his personal matters? Of course, there were still many people he wanted to meet. For example, how were his old friends in the Sword Soldiers Corps? For example, now that he was the boss of the dome, could he get a few of his senior sisters to pour bathwater for him and scrub his back? It was a pity that he didn't have time for these privileges and corruption. What a pity! After the fifth ring was Zhou Xian, which was also a big realm that he valued very much. Not only was there Zhou Xian, but there was also Heaven's Choice. In his mind, they were his own people who would eventually walk together with the fifth ring. There were no evildoers in Zhou Xian in the interior heaven, but this was not absolute. For example, no one in the fifth ring had gone up, but in fact, they had a Yang spirit who had also taken this step. No one knew why it was delayed, but in the end, that she would not run away. This was the requirement of his own state of mind. At this step, how could he hide and not meet people? Once again, he flew towards the interior heaven. With the experience, he was very confident. It was hard to say whether this method would become his main method of traveling the universe in the future. However, according to Qing Xian, whether or not one really left one's name in the interior heaven would affect this method of travel. Therefore, his biggest problem now was to not enter. Under this operation, the outline of Zhou Xian appeared in front of him from afar. The interior heaven would not directly project a cultivator to the boundary you wanted to reach. There would still be a distance in between. In the eyes, it could be reached in a month. In detail, he had spent more time cultivating in Zhou Xian than the fifth ring. Among the few big obstacles in his life, he built his foundation in the lower 3 mother planets, Jin Dan in the fifth ring, Yuanying in Zhou Xian, Jinjuan in Heaven's Choice, and Primordial Spirit in the anchor chain. It was very strange for a boundary to rise to a state. Like the fifth ring, Zhou Xian did not have a heaven and earth grand membrane. However, it had the heaven and earth chessboard, which was even more abnormal than the grand membrane. Cultivators entering and leaving Zhou Xian had to go through the screening of the heaven and earth chessboard. This could be done automatically by the heaven and earth chessboard, but it could also be controlled by someone. In Lu Xiaoyi's opinion, the 2 safest boundaries for him were the fifth ring and Zhou Xian. He had spent hundreds of years here and had entered and exited countless times. The chessboard should be very familiar with his aura, so there was no possibility of it recognizing him wrongly. Therefore, when he was near Zhou Xian, he was very relaxed. However, this time, there was a little different. He did not enter like before. Instead, he was instantly pulled into a chessboard space that he could not identify for the time being. This was man-made, Lu Xiaoyi knew very well.
Who are you?
Tell me your name. A dignified voice sounded in the chessboard space. The carefree wandering one ear. Lu Xiaoyi remained calm and collected. But you are not the real carefree wandering one. At this time when the universe is in chaos, what is your purpose in trespassing into Zhou? Tell me the truth. The voice was cold and hard, and there was no room for negotiation. Using the heaven and earth chessboard in Zhou for personal vendetta. Have you thought about the consequences of doing this? Lu Xiaoyi sighed in his heart. Sure enough, accidents always happened when you were not paying attention. Zhou, which seemed to be the safest place, had instead attracted inexplicable targeting. What was the purpose? Personal? Or was it from the interior heaven?
He could not tell yet.
However, there was one thing that was certain. The matter was not as simple as the other party had said. It was as if it was a normal routine inspection. This was clearly targeting him. Then, why was this person wasting time and breath? Chapter 1755. Lu Xiaoyi had a chance to get out of the chessboard because he knew the nickname of the chessboard of heaven and earth, Wood Fox. Primordial spirit treasures acted fairly, but they could also be manipulated to a certain extent. This was because the rules of the chessboard of heaven and earth were originally a defense system controlled by both spirit treasures and human beings. It was a dual control system, but the root was in the chessboard of heaven and earth. He had the ability to talk to Wood Fox directly, but he didn't want to use this ability now. If he left, he wouldn't be able to understand the reason in depth. When he came back to settle old scores, these Taoists would have 10,000 ways to fool him. Since they trapped him on the chessboard, they wanted to gather people to harm him. Judging from the fact that they didn't attack him immediately, this was just an individual behavior. Otherwise, they wouldn't have dilly-dallying with him. Then, let's see what kind of monsters they were. The waiting time was longer than he had imagined, which confirmed his guess. This was not a system against him, but more like an individual's private behavior. Now, they were looking for help, but they were not very good at it. Finally, 5 figures appeared on the chessboard. There were yang spirits, primordial spirits, and yin spirits. Piecing things together, it was also difficult to gather them. The leading yang spirit was very strange. According to the rules of Zhou, we must find out the origin of those with unknown origins. Will you obediently cooperate with our inquiry, or will you stubbornly resist? This is the space of the 5 pieces chessboard. You have no chance. As he spoke, his feet were bound, and the space was locked. His movements were restricted. Obviously, he had entered the rhythm of playing chess. 5 pieces chessboard was a simple variation of Go. One side was connected, and the other side was blocked. In the process of playing, the attacking and defending positions were constantly changing. When connecting, one had to block, and when blocking, one had to consider connecting. It was a kind of chess game that tested the 3-dimensional imagination of human beings. But for cultivators, 5 pieces chessboard was not very interesting because their spatial imagination was far stronger than that of ordinary human beings. The pure 5 pieces chessboard was not challenging, so the 5 pieces chessboard in the chessboard of heaven and earth was very different from the 5 pieces chessboard in the mortal world. It was a complete variation, even out of the scope of normal chess. Once the foundation of the game was established, the rules naturally flowed into the minds of both players. Lu Xiaoyi knew that this was not a life and death game, but a trap. Firstly, there were 5 people on the main attacking side, while there was only 1 person on the blocking side. The huge difference in numbers made it impossible for the connate numinous treasure to allow life and death in such an unfair situation. Otherwise, the 5 people on the attacking side would have too great of an advantage, and there would be no competition. The goal of the main company was to form a line on the chessboard, just like a normal 5-piece alignment. Once it was formed, the heaven and earth chessboard would bestow them with additional power, trapping the lone player on the other side. Taking and seizing was all for the sake of capturing. The goal of the solo player was to destroy the connection between the main attacker and make them unable to form a straight line. If they succeeded in a short period of time, they would be able to escape from the heaven and earth chessboard. During this process, there would definitely be collisions between the chess pieces on both sides. To put it simply, it was a collision between the 5 opponents and Liu Xiaoyi. It was a one-on-one challenge, but to Liu Xiaoyi, it was meaningless because he could not kill his opponents, just as his opponents could not kill him. Protection was for both sides. If the other side had one less person, they would never be able to form a 5-piece alignment. If he was finished, then there would be no point in playing the game. Liu Xiaoyi silently muttered a name. Mu Yehu, do you still recognize me? The heaven and earth chessboard woke up from its deep silence, immediately knowing that something had gone wrong. Young Emperor, please don't blame me. Someone must have made a mistake. I will change it now. No. I remember that there is a rule in the heaven and earth chessboard. If one side makes a mistake, the other side has the right to change the rules? The 5 chess pieces on Zhou Xian were moving. Their most urgent need was to form a line so that they would have the power to capture this person. However, this intruder clearly did not play according to the rules. According to the rules, if the only sun blocked the head of the 3 pieces, the 3 pieces would collapse after a battle and could only gather again. If the only sun blocked the head of the 2 pieces, the 2 pieces would not disperse. Under such rules, the only sun's best method should be to wait for 3 out of the 5 Zhou Xian pieces to form a line before attacking. This would achieve the most direct effect. However, this only child was clearly inexperienced. He went straight for the chess pieces that 2 Zhou immortals had formed and crashed into them. He was a Zhou immortal essence, soul-perfected lord who had been invited to help. After about 10 breaths, one of the chess pieces disappeared. The only child crashed into the other chess piece. Again, after about 10 breaths, the 2 Zhou immortals' chess pieces completely disappeared. Liu Xiaoyi pointed her halberd and shouted, "That Yongshin rat! If you want to find trouble with me, then come at me. What's the point of sending these cannon fodders to their deaths? Don't you dare to fight." Sneakily, the way of heaven opened a hole and let you cowardly rats come up. You've tarnished the name of Yang God. The remaining 3 people felt a chill in their hearts. They knew that the heaven and earth chessboard had discovered their little tricks. The rules had changed and could decide life and death. However, in their hearts, who would dare to speak lightly to this fierce person? Originally, this was a sure-kill situation, but their understanding of their opponent was still too shallow. They did not expect that he could reach an agreement with the heaven and earth chessboard in such a short time and change the situation from a difficult situation to a life and death situation. This immediately made them lose confidence. If they wanted to invite more people, the heaven and earth chessboard would not allow it. Among the remaining 3 people, there was a Een God perfected lord. How could they dare to attack this person? They had the intention to retreat and could not help but regret their reckless help. If they had known that it was this fierce person, why would they have come up and embarrassed themselves? Liu Xiaoyi pressed forward step by step. This was the disadvantage of the chess piece space. It was impossible to get close to the opponent quickly like in the outside space.
He could only move step by step.
However, it was precisely because of this that it created a huge psychological pressure on the Yang God. Among the 5 people, he was the only one who knew the ins and outs of the matter. However, he did not expect this person to be able to communicate with the heaven and earth chessboard and instantly destroy his plan that he thought was flawless. Why didn't he know that this person was difficult to deal with? Even if he was in the Yang God phase, he did not dare to face him alone. This person could kill a Yang God when he was in the Een God phase. He was a well-known fierce figure in the universe and was not someone he could deal with. That was why he had used the heaven and earth chessboard to set up a difficult situation without involving life and death. It was all because this person was not easy to deal with. However, all of this had come to nothing. It was all empty talk. He had been entrusted by someone to set up a net here and wait. He happened to take advantage of the opportunity that he was in charge of guarding the chessboard and could find this person in the first place. However, all his plans had failed in the face of absolute strength. Not only had he lost face, but he might also pose a huge threat to the sect behind him. This was what really worried him. Chapter 1756. The young god had been forced into a desperate situation. He had been entrusted by others and had to do it for a reason. However, he was not a person who would risk his life knowing that there was no hope. This was the loophole in the mental state of cultivators after the Tao of Heaven opened a gap. Some people's realms had risen, but they did not have a corresponding mental state. He was just a young god in name. A real young god would not easily accept such an entrustment and put his future on a dangerous intercept. But once he accepted it, he would inevitably use his life to complete it. He was not. Even he knew this very well. The key was that he was already in a difficult position. Even if he withdrew from the chessboard and retreated, the impact had already been caused. With this person's deep relationship with the big sex in Zhou Xian, how could they let him go so easily? Moreover, even if this person did not have such connections, as the guardian Taoist, he had abused his position for personal gain and opened the chessboard of heaven and earth to satisfy his own personal interests. This was absolutely intolerable in Zhou Xian. If everyone did this, it would cause damage to the reputation of the entire region. Therefore, the punishment had always been severe, no matter what your background was, even if you were from the 8 major forces. A failed assassination attempt, but he had gambled on his future. After that, the higher-ups of Zhou Xian would investigate everything that had happened on the chessboard. Nothing could be hidden. This was inevitable. Having made his decision, he said apologetically to the remaining 2 true monarchs, "The 2 of you, my actions have caused the 2 of you to suffer an undeserved calamity. This was not my intention. It was truly due to my poor planning, my strength was insufficient, and the opponent was too cunning. Now that the matter has been exposed, I have decided to leave. You 2 can do as you please. I will make up for what you owe me in the future. I hope you and I will see each other again." After saying this, he immediately withdrew the chessboard and chose to leave first. This was also a protective measure of the chessboard of heaven and earth for the 2 sides of the battle. Instead of ejecting the 2 sides at the same time, there was an order to prevent the weaker side from being eliminated from the chessboard. Therefore, when Lu Xiaoyi appeared outside the chessboard, the young god's surnamed son had already gone far away. It was not a small price to pay to leave the sect for a promise. At the same time, Lu Xiaoyi also understood that this person did not want to stay here and was forced to reveal the secret. He couldn't give chase, not because he couldn't, but because he couldn't afford to waste time. If a scoundrel like him didn't have the determination to fight, he would definitely flee for his life. When a young spirit desperately fled, it was really a big problem to catch him. However, the remaining 2 supremes did not run away. One of them was a primordial spirit, and the other was a Yin spirit. Clearly, they were very clear about their situation. They felt that the disadvantages of running away were far greater than accepting punishment in Zhou Xian. A sect was a cultivator's root. Not everyone could leave their roots and still thrive. Being a disciple of a sect was not easy, and a rogue cultivator's life was equally difficult. The Essence Soul replied awkwardly, "We were deceived by Senior Brother and are willing to accept your punishment. Please forgive me, fellow Taoist Lu." Lu Xiaoyi sighed. Those who shouldn't have left had run away. The remaining 2 probably wouldn't be able to find anything useful. However, after this incident, he couldn't help but have doubts about Zhou Xian's system. If they really did take action, would they be trustworthy? There was no way to confirm it. "You broke the sect's rules. I need an explanation." Carefree Travel was a gathering of great cultivators. The leaders of the 8 major forces in Zhou Xian were all here. Qingwei Immortal Sect, Yuanshi Cave, Carefree Travel, Huangting Taoism, Taishan Middle Yellow, Human Sect, Thousand Buddhas, Imperial Heaven, and Bitter Zen Temple were all here. It was impossible to do this before the great changes in the universe. However, now was the eve of chaos. Until the end of the era, such a situation would only become more and more intense. The string would become tighter and tighter, but there wouldn't be the slightest relaxation. After explaining the specific situation, Lu Xiaoyi didn't say anything more. He left the hall and waited for the others to make a decision. He didn't accept the answer of waiting for a while and discussing it. It was a bit unreasonable to ask for an answer now, but he had the right to be unreasonable now. The faces of Zhou Xian and the other young spirit helmsmen were a little unnatural because they had been excluded from the small circle of interior masters. Of course, that wasn't entirely true. At least there was still half of the carefree travel. They were the current recruiters, young and full of vitality. They dared to think and do what they wanted. They didn't have any psychological burden to destroy a super big world that was as famous as Zhou Xian. It was as if it was a very normal thing. Great Buddha bitter, Zen smiled bitterly. We must participate. Otherwise, we will be excluded from the mainstream of the cultivation world. We were ignored once, and we were ignored again and again. Especially when we haven't made any achievements in the younger generation, Sun God of Human Sex suggested. We can't have fewer people going. Otherwise, we can't show our determination and strength. Although there are no outstanding juniors who can squeeze into that circle for the time being, at least half of them can be considered as our own people. There was no doubt. For them, it was impossible to refuse such a call because others wouldn't always give them such an opportunity. If they refused once, there wouldn't be a next time. Bai Mei looked at Yuan Shi Yang God. Fellow Taoist Chu, you have to investigate the matter of your junior brother. If it's just a personal grudge, it doesn't matter. I'm afraid there are other secrets. We're going this time to show off Zhou Xian's strength. If we rush there and show our buttocks, Yuan Shi Yang God's eyes were gloomy. Don't worry. We've already tracked him down. Unless he never comes back, otherwise we've also used some tricks. We were indeed deceived. You also know that in the big sects, the lower-level cultivators are somewhat blind to the sun gods of our sect. That kid is really ruthless. He killed 2 of them directly. 2 primordial spirits. Lu Xiaoyi and Zhou Xian's agreement was not to move out for the time being, because this place was closer to the Hengdi boundary. With their speed, they could reach it in 60 years by walking in the reverse space. It wasn't a good thing to go early. With so many sun gods gathered, it would be difficult for them to not give themselves away after a long time. They would wait here for 40 years, and then join forces with the heavens chosen to go to the beast territory. During this time, the news was sealed, and only the leaders of these big sects knew. After all, Zhou Xian was too big, and there were too many people. It was impossible to block everyone's mouths. Before leaving, Bai Mei sent him off. Don't worry too much. Yuan Shi just can't put down his face. They're actually very angry about this matter. When a sect is big, there are all kinds of people. The heavenly Tao has opened a gap in the realm, and any Tom, Dick, or Harry can come up. Lu Xiaoyi didn't care. I don't mind. Bai Mei looked at him. Compared to the old you, you're finally not vengeful anymore. Lu Xiaoyi smiled. No, I'm still the old me. It's just that there's no point in avenging people who aren't important. A clumsy encirclement. The plan wasn't thorough enough, and the execution wasn't firm enough. They didn't have the courage to risk their lives. It was more like a perfunctory action. I don't have the interest to pursue it. The only use is to make me doubt Zhou Xian's system. So, I can't be angry. Once I'm angry, someone will be pleased. Chapter 1757. Bai Mei was very pleased. This young man's growth was beyond his imagination. He was very glad that he had chosen the most correct way to deal with this person as a spy. You're right. It's not so much an interception as a way to make you doubt Zhou Xian. If you don't deal with it well, it will have an impact on this gathering of troops. But in terms of facts, I have a few opinions. Are you willing to listen? Lu Xiaoyi said sincerely, I will always listen to your opinions and am willing to use them as a cornerstone to deal with things. The biggest characteristic of the younger generation is that they are young. But the biggest hidden danger is also young. So, I solemnly ask you not to give up your responsibility just because the young people have taken advantage of the times to fly higher. If you need to give them advice and teach them a lesson. Bai Mei was interested. If I teach you a lesson, will you listen? Lu Xiaoyi laughed dryly. Maybe a lot of it will go in one ear and out the other, but I will always listen to some of it. The white eyebrows snorted, but he was very satisfied. The best thing about this young man was that he always knew when to persevere and when to accept good advice. This kind of person could often go further because they had the right attitude. Proud but not arrogant, outstanding but not flock, modest but not humble. This sun god couldn't have been waiting for you. Judging from the incident, he was a little hasty, but his purpose was very clear. The transit time of the chessboard of heaven and earth is very short. If he hesitated for a moment, you would have gone. If he could stop you, he must have been mentally prepared for this. But he was not well prepared. You don't know who he is, but it's impossible that he doesn't know who you are. If he really wants to take you down, he is far from enough in terms of plan and personnel. This can only mean that he received the news that you were going back to Zhou Xian very soon. It was so short that he couldn't prepare a reliable hunting plan for you. Who else knows that you are coming? The fifth ring knows. But they won't leak it, and they can't show up. The transmission of the news can't keep up with your speed. So, in fact, you should be very clear that your threat comes from above. If you can do it, others may be able to do it. Lu Xiaoyi was silent. This was actually his judgment. With the interior sky as a transit, no one could catch up with his speed unless it was someone who could use the same interior sky as him. Bai Mei reminded him, "What I'm worried about is that this is just the beginning. There are many places you need to go. You thought that you were safe in Zhou Xian, but you were schemed against. Maybe you think that this kind of interception is not worth mentioning, but I want to tell you that if you didn't have the previous contact with the chessboard of heaven and earth and couldn't change the rules of the 5 pieces alignment, then do you still think that you are invincible? Under the rules, if you couldn't kill the other party, you could only entangle them. Among them, there was a young god. It wasn't difficult for the 5 suns to line up in a line. In my Zhou Xian, this is the most effective way to capture foreign enemies. The 5 chess pieces alignment could borrow the power of the chessboard of heaven and earth. With this kind of imprisonment and capture, did he dare to say that he had absolute confidence in winning? So it's not that it's not dangerous, it's just that you don't realize it yourself. It's just that the opponent didn't do a good job against you. That's why Yuan Shi didn't really mind that you killed 2 of their primordial spirits, because this chess game was indeed full of malice. Lu Xiaoyi nodded. You're right, senior brother. I've learned a lot. Bai Mei said coldly. Thunder sounded in a silent place, and you attacked in a place you thought was the safest. Moreover, there were 2 layers of killing. First, there was the death trap, and then there was the destruction of the alliance. The former was broken by the tacit understanding between you and Wild Fox, and the latter was broken by your calmness. You were lucky, but you can't always rely on luck. I can't guess where the next killing trap will be, so you can only rely on yourself. Lu Xiaoyi sneered. It doesn't matter. The more killing traps they set up, the more they will give themselves away. It's a pity that I can't go back now. Otherwise, as long as I check who left the chessboard of heaven and earth, I'll know who is behind this. Then come on. If this person doesn't do it himself, I'd like to see how many people he can find in the main world who can defeat me. Bai Mei sighed inwardly. Young people are really thick-skinned. It was also because of this courage that he was able to do so many great things. If it was someone who was afraid of the slightest thing, once there was a psychological barrier, they would become cautious and cautious in doing things. How would they be able to reach this step? Bai Mei was a little puzzled. It seems that you young people don't pay much attention to keeping secrets up there. You just came out, and someone immediately followed you to ruin your plans. Then, how did you ensure the surprise of the attack in Hengdi sector? Lu Xiaoyi explained to him. First of all, there's no way to keep it a secret. Those guys are all arrogant and conceited. They use ancient cultivation as their standard. They can't stand to be sneaky, but they yearn to be unruly. Such a group can't have a leader, and it's even more impossible for everyone to keep a secret like an army. So it's not that I'm careless, it's that I don't have a solution. Coming out with me may not necessarily be to save Hengdi sector. These are 2 different things. Hengi sector is already doomed. No one can save it. Whoever saves it will have a bad reputation in this circle. But the struggle between cultivators is still on the Great Tao. It's not that we love each other just because we have a common goal. We're just robbers who gather together to rob. After robbing, we still have to fight for the Great Tao of dividing the loot. This is unavoidable. As for the surprise of the attack on Hengi sector, it's actually not that important. Facing Bai Mei's puzzled gaze, Liu Xiaoyi was very firm. If you look at all the world-ending wars in history, you can find that there's no example of a successful sneak attack. In the cultivation world, strength is the hard indicator. Temporarily occupying a sector doesn't have much practical significance. You don't even dare to do anything to their commoners. So our strategy is to crush them, not sneak attack. This is the reason why we need to unite everyone. Bai Mei reminded him, history also tells us that in every world-ending war, the attacked side would receive the news early or late. They would be prepared, and more than 30% of them would take the initiative to counterattack. For example, the Celestial Wolf expedition of the Fifth Ring sector 20,000 years ago was actually a big counterattack. In the last Great War of the Fifth Ring sector, you also didn't hide near the border. Liu Xiaoyi said softly, we already expected that Hengi sector would find helpers. Then what kind of helpers do you think they can find outside of the Taoists and Buddhists of the main world? Even the Great Realm is on our side. Who would dare to stand with us? Who else could they find? Could it be the helpers from the last Great War of the Fifth Ring sector, the Winged Man and Zerg? I'm looking forward to it. As for taking the initiative to attack, it seems like you still don't understand the orthodoxy of Hengi sector. To them, once they leave Hengi sector and the Hung River, they are nothing. Chapter 1758. The Hengi boundary was still a scene of prosperity. Of course, this so-called prosperity was only for some people. Just a few years ago, a drought that swept through half of the Hengi boundary suddenly descended. After a few years, it became more and more severe. There was no chance of rain at all. Coupled with the unusually high summer temperature of the Hengi boundary, life was really difficult for the ordinary people of the Hengi boundary. Even the water level of the sacred river, the Hung River, dropped a lot. The riverbed was exposed, and the water flow was very slow. This affected the living conditions of many people along the river. The worship of the gods was held again and again. Large-scale activities to invite the gods began to spread gradually. This was the natural law of the planet, a natural phenomenon that occurred periodically. It was similar to the natural cycle of the Little Ice Age, but it was not something that the gods could save them. Of course, for such a large boundary, there were always places that were not affected by the disaster. There were always holy places where people could live as usual. However, these things were too far away for the ordinary people in the disaster area. Thousands of miles away was an eternal legend in this undeveloped place. Most people lived within a few hundred miles for their entire lives. How could they enjoy the nourishment that only the upper class could enjoy? The rich left one after another, but the temples were still flourishing. The same disaster happened on this land, but it had different effects on different groups of people. This was the Hengi Jie, a place where secular management was sluggish, irresponsible, and inefficient. In such a large cultivation planet, this kind of situation was hard to understand. Because with the power of a cultivator, even if they could not change the world, it was still easy to alleviate the drought to a certain extent. However, in this strange place, such a large number of deaths became the best opportunity for reincarnation. It had to be said that the Hengi boundary people's brain circuits were very strange. They thought differently from ordinary people. But there were also people who were not willing to resign themselves to fate and wanted to decide their own future. For some reason, it seemed that in the past few hundred years, there were more and more ordinary people with such thoughts. Although it was only a small group and far from the mainstream, this kind of thought was very dangerous. It could often lead those who did not know the truth to start a riot together. Therefore, in the Hengi realm, there would always be such traitors appearing everywhere. Of course, they would be cruelly suppressed because they did not have enough power. After all, the foundation was still too weak. The factor of resistance had not completely spread, and there was also a lack of suitable environment and atmosphere. However, due to the drought this time, the grain reserves had been completely depleted and their savings had been reduced to nothing. Thus, they were able to satisfy the basic needs of change. Then, there were those who had evil intentions and were secretly stirring up trouble in various places. Under the rise and fall of one after another, they actually formed a force and created a huge commotion. In the world of cultivation, rebellion was the most dangerous and impossible action. But when people were starving, naturally, they would not think so much. And even in the Hengi region, the way cultivators affected the lives of mortals was mostly through temples. Even though the Hengi region was very strange, it was the foundation of the cultivation world. It was an ironclad rule that mortals could not be attacked directly. It was impossible for cultivators to act recklessly. Still, the troubles of mortals could only be solved by ordinary mortals. This depended on the suppression of the aristocrats, landlords, and high-caste people in various places. They had sufficient manpower, relatively more abundant rations, subtle help from various temples, better equipment, and more extensive knowledge. Therefore, the result was actually destined. Tayala State was the place where the drought was the most serious. Of course, it was also the place where the peasant riots were the most frequent. The local king could not control it. With the help of other states, it was not easy to suppress the riots in the state. After several months, more than 10 leaders of the riots were caught. Now, these people were tied up in the square of the capital. They had been starved for several days and were only given some water to keep them alive. They were waiting for the day of the official public execution to serve as a warning to others. On this day, there was a sea of people in the capital. Those who could live in the city were at least small craftsmen, not the lowest class of people. Of course, they did not have a good impression of these so-called rioters. They thought that they were the root of the disaster and that they had to be killed to appease the people. For the people of Hengi region, there were not many entertainment activities. The temple activities were the main focus. Therefore, many people came. At least hundreds of thousands of people crowded the place. There were still people squeezing in, just to see the final scene of blood splattering 7 feet. In this place, no matter what kind of public activity it was, it would ultimately evolve into a religious activity. Therefore, before the execution, a series of religious performances must be held. This was also something that ordinary people liked to watch the most. Life was very hard, so they could only take advantage of this opportunity to relax. It was human nature. The activities had been going on for many days. This was also the characteristic of the Hengi sect's religious activities. They were slow and unorganized. If you were not an indigenous person, you would not know what the activities were. However, the indigenous people knew. They could always accurately step on the activities. It was noisy, crowded, and formed a flow of people. Then, they would leave behind filth on the ground. For example, on the first day, they went to the temple to worship the gods. They fed the monkeys, tigers, and rats. Then, the women carried a big iron kettle in groups. Then, everyone rushed to the river outside the city and drank a few mouthfuls. Then, they came back to spit fire, played with snakes, and burned a paper man that looked like a drought demon on the street. Everyone cheered loudly, as if they had survived a drought. The method to make the joy last longer was very simple. They would stab a drought demon and burn it again. It was a simple joy. Of course, the happiest thing was to watch the performance of the king's army. Those soldiers with big beards who looked mighty and majestic began to stack on the street. All kinds of human pyramids. On the back of a horse. On the back of a camel. On a small cart. All kinds of strange shapes and flying postures. It was like the heavenly soldiers and generals sent by the gods, stacking together. The first group might only be 2 or 3 people working together. Then more and more people would appear. In the end, the poor camel and the camel team would be pressed down by more than 10 burly men, making it difficult for it to move. They would be happy. they would be satisfied. They stacked together and rushed towards a bright future. It was even more festive than the festival. Their right hand grabbed something sticky and stuffed it into their mouth. After a period of time, their left hand would clean up the digested paste. It was also a very funny natural cycle. After more than 10 days, the big shots finally arrived at the capital city. This also meant that the most important part of the festival was about to begin. Chapter 1759. Amidst the loud cheers, several carriages drove into the city. In the lead carriage, a plainly dressed middle-aged man appeared to be a little out of place with the others around him. In the Hengi region, people did not regard plainness as beauty. Luxurious clothing represented one's status. In the dictionary here, there was no such thing as traveling at night in brocade clothes. One had to travel during the day, and the more crowded the place, the better. Therefore, in other domains, even the most vulgar nouveau riche would not wear a few kilograms of gold chain around their necks. But here, it was a common occurrence. There were even people who would make gold leaf clothes that weighed more than 10 kilograms to show off their nobility. They wished that others would not know of their wealth, even if they had to be accompanied by a few burly bodyguards. The people in the carriages were all dressed in luxurious clothing. But their luxurious clothing was different from the luxurious clothing of the merchants of the lower castes. Because of their education and influence since they were young, they appeared to be more tasteful. At first glance, one could tell that they were from big families with real status and history. But among them, a plainly dressed middle-aged man was very special. In the atmosphere of the Hengi sector, he could still stand out from the crowd and did not care about the opinions of the people around him. This could only mean that his status was not ordinary. A true ruler did not need to use external things to show himself. The driver flicked the whip, and even though it was not wide on the busy streets, it still sped as if it was flying. The attendant at the shaft of the carriage turned his head to face the carriage, and his expression was one of sincere respect. "Amir, we've arrived at the capital of Tyala." Amir nodded silently, his expression melancholy. It wasn't that he was putting on an act, but because of his unparalleled reputation in the Hengi realm, if people saw him, it might cause an uncontrollable uproar. This wasn't the first time that people had been trampled on. He was practicing asceticism. This was a big tradition in the Hengi sector, especially the Lice Granny Great Divine Path that he believed in. It was the mainstream Hengi sector orthodoxy that valued asceticism the most. It was once every 100 years for 100 years, which meant that the cultivators of the Lice Granny Path spent at least half of their life in asceticism. It was the most devout divine path in the Hengi sector. The so-called ascetic cultivation in the Hengi sector was different from the mainstream orthodoxy of the universe's self-cultivation world. It was true ascetic cultivation. It wasn't wandering alone in the void of the universe. That was traveling, not ascetic cultivation. The so-called ascetic cultivation in the Hengi realm referred to the comprehension of the mortal world and the sealing of all one's abilities. If one used the power of cultivation during this period of time, then this ascetic cultivation would be considered a failure. Not only would one not benefit, but they would also be damaged. Amir Khan was now in the midst of such penance. Since it's an ascetic cultivation, of course you have to eat and sleep in the open. You're no different from a mortal. Driving a few luxurious cars is like going on an excursion. However, he had no other choice. When he heard the news, he was still in a faraway foreign land and could not rush back in time. Under the premise that he could not use his ability, he could only rely on the power of the secular world because he had a reason to come back. During his ascetic cultivation journey, he was very worried about the various situations that had occurred in the disaster area of the Hengi realm. The suppression methods used by the local kings also made him uneasy. It was somewhat too cruel. He was very clear that the root cause of the situation was not the food and water, but the disregard and belittlement of the lives of the lower caste people in the Hengi realm for a long time. If there was a slightly more efficient local government with a little more effort with the richness of the Hengi realm, all of this would not have happened. All these years, he had been working hard to pacify the people, urging the local kings to strengthen relief, improve the transportation of goods, improve efficiency, etc. If everything could have improved even a little bit, with the hardworking nature of the people of the Hengdi realm, there would not have been endless riots everywhere. Unfortunately, even if his status was high, his caste was noble, and he had great influence among the people and countless followers. When it came to the personal gains and losses of those with vested interests, he had no choice but to be defeated. Just one word: perfunctory. Let his well-intentioned advice go down the drain. This was not something that could be solved in a short time. The deep-rooted thing formed by hundreds of thousands of years of history could not be completely changed by him and his disciples alone. Behind those local kings, nobles, and high caste, which one of them did not have a strong background? There was even no lack of existences like him, who were respectfully called Khan. In such a contest, he who was alone was defeated as expected. The gap between ideal and reality was something that even a top cultivator like him could not change. He had put in a lot of effort, and the most direct way for cultivators was to use the methods of cultivation to solve the problem, to apply what they had learned. Large-scale rain formation, inviting gods, and so on, but these methods could only alleviate the situation for a while, and could not fundamentally solve the problem. In the natural law of the Hengdi realm, the drought of these years was originally a way of self-adjustment. It was a natural response of nature to the environment and population, and it was in accordance with the internal law of the realm. As a cultivator, he was well aware of this point. So in fact, he did not dare to interfere too much. This was different from finding a desolate star in the void of the universe to evolve the changes of the Great Tao. This was their home planet, a super big world with tens of billions of people, and no one dared to act rashly. It was not only the Hengdi realm, but in fact, every cultivator in the cultivation realm did not dare to make a deep conversion of the 5 elements on their home planet because it would kill people and a large number of lives. Therefore, urging the rain had a great limitation. It could be withstood when the drought was light, but for this kind of periodic change in the law of nature, the power of the cultivators did not dare to exceed their authority, because this kind of change in nature would follow the ancient internal needs, and its purpose was to support the stars for a longer period of time. It was like a self-detoxification, adjustment. If urging the rain did not work, then irrigate and build canals. Relying on the few big rivers of the Hengdi realm and using the power of cultivators to divert the branches, this kind of method was technically not difficult for cultivators with great power. It could be a matter of punching and kicking, and they could plow 100 feet of river on the ground. But this kind of effort also caused a fierce debate in the secular world and the cultivation realm. The people of the Hengdi realm worshipped the rivers deep in their bones and rejected all efforts to dig canals and ditches along the banks of the rivers, because this was disrespectful to the gods. Especially in their attitude towards the Hengdi realm, it was as if digging canals on the Hengdi realm was cutting a hole in one's body. It would cause one to lose the most precious thing. In short, it was best not to change anything. As for the ordinary people in the drought area, what was so important about them? If they could survive, they would be lucky, but if they could not, they would die early and reincarnate. Who knows, they might be reincarnated into a rich upper-caste family. Amir Khan practiced his ascetic cultivation in this kind of rush, and the more he cultivated, the harder it became. The only thing he could do now was to at least give these rioting people a way out. He knew that they were not rioters and did not really want to overthrow anyone, but it was a natural reaction under the pressure of survival. This was his purpose in coming to the capital of Tayala. Killing people would not stop all of this, and the problem would not be solved. If he killed one group, there would definitely be another. Chapter 1760. The carriage drove into the square and approached the pavilion. The sun was scorching, so the nobles could not squeeze under the sun like the commoners. They had canopies to shade them from the sun, and they had honey and wine. These were 2 completely different lifestyles. When Amir Khan arrived, the nobles of Tayara all stood up to welcome him. In the Hengdi sector, The ascetic cultivation of cultivators was all too common and could be seen everywhere. Not only were there grand cultivators, there were also cultivators of different realms. They were everywhere in the Hengi sector. Some were willing to go to the remote mountains, while others were willing to go to the busy streets. To the nobles, these people were not to be offended. This was because under their seemingly destitute attire, there was actually an extremely terrifying power hidden within. Of course, the fear was mutual. The nobles of the mortal world were afraid of the cultivators who cultivated ascetically. Similarly, the ascetics were also very afraid of the local kings and nobles of large families. This was because who knew which famous cultivator was hidden in the family tree of these nobles? They might even be related to the seniors of their own orthodoxy, so they could not do whatever they wanted and order people around. For example, the nobles of the Tayal estate had a Khan in their family name. They also had countless grand cultivators. With such family power, even a realm master like Amir Khan could not order them around. They had to negotiate with each other, so a delicate balance was reached between the cultivation world and the mortal world. This was a normal phenomenon. In this universe, no one could be above everything. On the contrary, in the mortal realms like the splendid heaven and earth, only those in power had supreme power. If Amir Khan wanted to pardon the death row prisoners, he had to reach an agreement with the nobles. He could not make the decision by himself. A life for a life, and a debt must be paid. It is only right and proper. These 10 people have all taken lives, and many of them have taken more than one life. In order to prevent the riot from spreading, Amir Khan calmed the people down as a show of conciliation. We can understand his feelings, but if he really did that, what would happen to the victims? Wouldn't the Hengi civil code become a decoration? The local king and the other nobles politely refused. They had their own ideas. According to historical tradition, they could not indulge these traitors because they had destroyed everyone's wealth. As for the overall situation, it was not their place to worry about it. It was not their responsibility. But since the Khan has come in person, we understand what you mean. How about this? Although the death penalty for these criminal leaders is unavoidable, we will try our best to protect their wives and children. It can also be considered as leaving them with a memento so that their bloodline will not be cut off. Of course, his wife and children could be spared. Not only could they be slaves, but they could also. These nobles were very calculative. Amir Khan sighed in his heart. He had long known that this would be the result. This was not the first time he had failed to intervene. In the Hengi realm, the power of tradition was extremely strong. It was so strong that even young God Khan could not change it. This was the limitation of the Hung River system. Their connection to the Hung River mother planet was too deep. This gave them the power of a god, but it also entangled them here. They couldn't break free. In the various realms of the cultivation world in the universe, there were very few orthodoxies that were so closely connected to the secular world, like the Hung River mother planet. Amir Khan, one of the 100 young god grand priests of the Hung River system, was ranked at the top of the peak. The ability he showed during his ascetic cultivation was completely inconsistent with his status. This was not surprising. It was precisely because of his integrity that his methods were inferior to those high khans who were far inferior to him. They had bottom lines, perseverance, and compassion. This made him have a great reputation in the Hengi realm, but he could not express this reputation in any way. Of course, this was a blessing in disguise. It was also because of his persistence that he could be ranked in the top 3 among the young gods of the Hung River system. Master. These natives don't know what's good for them. Should we teach them a lesson? You don't have to worry about any disputes. It's fine as long as they know their limits. In fact, the other grand priests do the same. How many of them really follow the rules during their ascetic cultivation? As long as no one dies, everyone is a cultivator and can understand each other. These people have nothing but profit in their eyes. They don't even care about the dignity of the temple. This was the second disciple of the imperial chariot. He was more quick-witted. Amir Khan shook his head. I will never treat the people of the Hung River system in this way, no matter if they are noble or lowly. poor or rich. Remember, the wheel of history can never be changed by one person. I can't do it. Even if I really become a god, I can't do it. It needs to be passed on from generation to generation. Therefore, whether you can succeed or not is actually secondary. The most important thing is that you have to stick to your original intention. As long as every generation thinks this way, they will definitely be able to change the bad habits of this world. The attendant was the third disciple. But I don't see any changes. Master, you have cultivated hard for thousands of years and formed your own ideas. But those who are willing to follow you, except for the poor people of the lower castes, have a lot of obstacles in the cultivation circle. Even among your disciples and followers, there are only a few of us. Even eldest senior brother left without a care. You see, a strange expression appeared on Amir Khan's always smiling and gentle face. This eldest disciple was the disciple he was most proud of, but also the one who was the most disobedient. He had always been dismissive of his ideas. Change needs an opportunity. The disciples asked, "What is considered an opportunity?" Amir Khan pondered. The so-called opportunity, don't think of it as a point, a person, or an event. That's too narrow. It should be a series of seemingly messy people and events twisted together, the product of the fermentation of time. Perhaps it has already started from the moment our Hung River system began to secretly participate in the war of the universe. I have advised them countless times, but no one was willing to listen to me. In recent years, there have been sporadic Hung River system young gods withering, including the drought of this world, but the ordinary people are unusually full of resistance. This has never happened before. It is not the character of the people of Hung River system. There must be something that changed their thinking in reincarnation. I don't know what this development will bring. But once these things start to become clear, it will be the day when the opportunity arrives. The second disciple frowned. Will it coincide with the change of the era? Amir Khan was surprised. I hope so, but not necessarily. I hope that the Hung River system will become more open and accept more things from the outside world. Not only do we have to have the courage to go out, we also have to welcome the mainstream of Taoism and Buddhism in. Only in this way can we welcome the arrival of the change of the era, like the other worlds, and not be an outsider watching coldly from the sidelines. Do you know that watching from the sidelines is the most dangerous? Do you think you can avoid some things by not participating? How is that possible? What's more, we are participating unwisely, sneaking around and hiding. Chapter 1761. The two disciples didn't know what to say. Actually, their own strength wasn't bad. To be able to stay by their master's side, they were originally very outstanding people in the Lice Divine Tao. They were both primordial soul cultivators, but their excellence was not enough in front of eldest senior brother. You mean man-made disasters? The third disciple was very sharp. Amir Khan sighed. Everything, environment, trends, coincidences, accidents. When these start to become more frequent, they all point to the same result: man-made disasters. The Hung River has been in drought for years, so there are man-made disasters. But if you look carefully, these problems have already shown signs, and they are the changes caused by the agitation of countless souls in the Hung River. There was once an ancient great god in the Hung River who said that too much dependence on the Hung River is not a good sign. The accumulation of quantitative changes will inevitably lead to qualitative changes. Unfortunately, no one was willing to listen. The chaos caused by the victims is just a small man-made disaster. It doesn't harm the foundation, let alone an opportunity. But if small man-made disasters continue to accumulate, it can lead to a big man-made disaster. Then do you think that after doing something in the Hung River boundary in private, not a trace of it has been leaked for hundreds of years? The two disciples were deeply worried when they heard this. In fact, their current mentality was very common in the cultivation circle of Hung River after the Battle of the Five Rings. They were afraid that outside forces would come knocking on their door, poke a hole in this, and reveal the truth to the world. But as time passed, they didn't see anyone saying anything, and slowly they became numb. But there were also those who were clear-headed and thought that the calm was just the prelude to the storm. Just like their master, Amir Khan. The third disciple was very careful. It can't be? Back then, I also participated in the operation. I was very careful and took many turns, and did a lot of concealment. I couldn't have left behind any clues. It has been so long, and you're still so worried. Isn't it a little? Amir Khan was stunned. A snake in a cup? Don't underestimate the mainstream cultivation world. If we treat them as fools, they will treat us as sacrifices. I don't have evidence, it's just a feeling. The funny thing is that in other aspects, those Khans and I are not on the same pace. But on this point, we have a common point, and this feeling is getting stronger and stronger. The second disciple was a little nervous. Is there anything I can do? Amir Khan smiled.
Yes.
We will send our most capable people to the various great realms. In terms of infiltration, we haven't done enough. This is also the reason why the orthodoxies are too different. In addition to the distance, there is no need to send out some people. For example, 5 rings. If there was a man-made disaster, it would definitely be involved. But we can't send anyone over because it's too far, because that domain is too vigilant. This was because even if they had discovered something, it would be a huge problem to pass on the information. However, there are a few realms that I think are bound to encounter man-made disasters. For example, Zhou Xian Anchor Chain, Heaven's Choice? This is also our direction. After all, we are closer. Moreover, Zhou Xian and Heaven's Choice are very complicated. The cat chain is composed of 8 realms, so it is relatively easier to infiltrate. There's no need for you to infiltrate their upper echelons. That's simply impossible. As long as you make friends as a traveling cultivator, you'll be able to hear the slightest bit of news. Are you willing to go? The 2 disciples nodded. They didn't lack the will to sacrifice themselves for Hung He. What they lacked was the opportunity. To be fortunate enough to become the disciple and follower of the godlike Hung He world, Amir Khan, they naturally had their own strengths that ordinary cultivators couldn't compare to. The third disciple was very regretful. It's a pity that eldest senior brother isn't here. If he was, I'm afraid there would be an unusual change. Eldest senior brother has been in the universe for a long time and is much more familiar with the outside world than us. He is also more popular. Amir Khan shook his head and still didn't say anything. His eldest disciple was no longer in this main world's universe. Instead, he had gone to some unspeakable place. His achievements had long surpassed him, his master. How could he order him around? Regarding how Hung He world's cultivators reached the upper realm and how they stepped into the half-immortal realm, although it couldn't be said to be a secret in the universe's cultivation world, very few people knew about it. Because it wasn't important, because they didn't care, because they belonged to the minority. In the mainstream world's orthodoxies, there were ancient methods and modern methods. The specific difference was that other than the Blight realm, all methods of ascending to immortality were ancient methods. This concept was actually a bit vague because there were countless orthodoxies in the universe. There were many special orthodoxies that didn't actually have the difference between ancient and modern methods. For example, Hung He world.
They had never changed.
No matter how the mainstream of the upper realm methods changed, they had always stuck to themselves. In other words, their orthodoxies couldn't actually get close to the modern Blight realm. It wasn't that they didn't want to, but that they couldn't. Just like the spirit attachment method of the Hengi boundary, there was no similarity between it and the Blight realm. Things were strange because of this point. In the recent ancient times, the people of Hung He world thought that their orthodoxies were different from the Blight realm, so they classified themselves as the path to interior heaven. But the problem was that interior heaven didn't allow them to enter. Because the interior view heaven did not recognize the Godhead, no one knew what was going on in the upper level of the power struggle. Anyway, if they couldn't go to interior heaven, they could only go to exterior heaven. There were many weird orthodoxies here like Hung He world. For some reason, the heavenly axiom classified Hung He world as a special orthodoxy system of exterior heaven and not an ancient method. To be honest, this wasn't specifically targeted at Hung He world. There were many such special inheritances in the universe that were all stuffed into exterior heaven. This was also the reason why Lu Xiaoyi couldn't see any Hung He world geniuses after going to interior heaven. If he had the ability to go to exterior heaven, he would definitely have a chance. But it was only a theoretical chance. There were tens of thousands of exterior heaven half-immortals, and the space was abnormally huge. How could it be so easy to meet one? Amir Khan's eldest disciple went to such a place, and he didn't take the step after reaching the sun's spirit realm. He took the step when he was in the primordial spirit realm like the other disciples. He was the role model and idol of all the disciples. He was regarded as a celestial being and carried the hope of this generation of Hung He world. He missed his most outstanding disciple very much. The student had surpassed the master and inherited 70 to 80% of what he had learned. Moreover, he had innovated and changed. Even when this guy was by his side, he was almost always singing the opposite tune and going against him. But there was one thing. As long as it was an outside task, there was no one that he couldn't complete. Amir Khan was very different in Hung He world. He was different from the others in every aspect. He deeply hated some of the bad habits of Hung He world. The reason why he was able to stay in his position was partly because of his powerful strength, and partly because he had a very outstanding disciple. For the sake of this evildoer, there were many things that would be very excessive when others did it, but when he did it, there would be a lot less criticism. Although he didn't want to admit it, he knew that this was the truth. Chapter 1762. Lu Xiaoyi plunged into the negative space. With his current speed, the journey from Zhou to Heaven's Choice would only take a little more than a year, so there was no need to use the interior heaven. He had always been a careful person and had a deep understanding of cheating. He knew that the biggest danger of cheating was that you had no end to it. You had to know when to stop. In the negative space, there were endless cultivators passing by. Since the last battle with Zhou Xian ended so hastily, both sides had reached a limited non-aggression agreement. It wasn't that they were willing to do so, but that Heaven's Choice realized that their dispute was actually very meaningless. Even if they won, they wouldn't get anything. Instead, they would face huge losses and casualties, and the main world would target them more. Of course, Zhou Xian didn't want to take the initiative to attack. Bai Mei and the others understood very well that when Heaven's Choice continent existed as a whole, no one could take down this giant. Unless, as the mainstream cultivation world guessed, when the main and negative worlds merged, Heaven's Choice continent would fall apart. There was no need to attack, just wait for it to fall. Under this premise, the communication between the two sides became more frequent. The people of Zhou Xian seized the time to experience the remaining 20 or so tablets of Great Way, and the outflow of Heaven's cultivators sped up. Heaven's Choice people were almost in a state of laissez-faire with the defense of the entire continent. They could see that no one would touch them. Their biggest problem was that the continent itself was so big. If the main and negative spaces merged, how many pieces would Heaven's Choice be broken into? People were weaving together. This situation that was impossible to appear in the void of the universe had happened between Zhou Xian and Heaven's Choice. Trade routes, bandits, pulling people into gangs, fighting teams, all kinds of abnormal developments had also formed a mutated prosperity. They had been neighbors for millions of years. Who would have thought that in the final stage of the universe's change, they would actually start to live in harmony? Under the change of the world, anything could happen. Bai Mei had told him that the most likely place that the primeval young god with the surname Sun had escaped to was Heaven's Choice continent. Because it was big enough and loose enough, it wouldn't attract anyone's attention if it accommodated a young god cultivator. If he found a place in the main world, how could his young god cultivation not attract the attention of people? He wouldn't deliberately look for a cultivator who didn't dare to fight to the death with him even with 2 helpers. What was there to keep thinking about? What a waste of time. Whatever he encountered, he would deal with it. That was his principle. After careful calculation, it was only a few days before he and this young god surnamed Sun went to Heaven's Choice. In such a short time, he couldn't even find enough helpers. What was he worried about? Actually, he had a lot of feelings for the Heaven's Choice continent. There were too many things here that he couldn't forget. For example, the sword Dao steel, the remaining 20 great Dao steels, his vicious beast friends, especially the no-need steel. He really wanted to see it. Unfortunately, he didn't have enough time this time. The pace of his life and cultivation was like a ghost urging him on. It was nonstop and he enjoyed it. Thinking about it, there were quite a few people he was familiar with in Heaven's Choice. For example, the lightning user he met during the Yuaning, the 3 female cultivators from Good Country, and the group from Martial Saint Training Hall. Had they returned? Are there any other swordsmen inside the Sword Dao Steel? After the sword soldier army shown in the Battle of the Five Rings, this place should have become a place for swordsmen to check in, right? However, he didn't have the mood to recruit another army. The position determined the state of mind. Now wasn't the time to train those swordsmen to do yuanying. As he sighed along the way, the continent in front of him was faintly visible. Tian country was as lively as ever. In fact, it was even more lively than before. Seeing that the Great Dao was collapsing faster and faster, the number of Great Dao steels that could be touched was decreasing. The cultivators were all scrambling for the remaining 20 or so Great Dao steels. Even the people in Heaven's Choice didn't have enough time, let alone the great cultivators from the main world. The Heaven's Choice continent cleverly opened up its own barrier. The benefit was that its relationship with the main world's cultivation world was greatly eased. Everyone was of the same origin. Whether it was Taoism or Buddhism, everyone could find their own origin here. There was no problem getting along with each other. This was a very clever strategy. It was only suitable for the beginning of the current era. However, this strategy also brought about a small side effect. That was, the price of goods skyrocketed. Cultivators couldn't make money. Which person who came here didn't have a full storage ring? Those who were shy didn't dare to come here to ask for a chance to enter the Dao steels. Everyone knew that paper was expensive in Luoyang, and the competition was fierce. The foreign Daoists increased the price of entering the Dao steels by a few times. The Great Dao was priceless, but the spiritual opportunity was priceless. Don't think that it's expensive. If you can't afford the spirit tablets, then don't go in. Fundamentally speaking, because the local cultivators have the support of their sects and have all sorts of connections, they still take up the majority of the spots. They don't need to hand over the spirit tablets, or, at least they have a limited number of them. No one could say anything. This was the difference between the host and the guests. Relatively speaking, the Heaven's Choice continent was already very noble to give the outsiders a chance to compete for resources. One couldn't ask for too much. The changes in the Great Dao, the duck knows when the spring river is warm. There would always be the first batch to know when the water is cold or warm. There would also be the second batch that reacted slightly slower. Of course, there would also be those who were slow and foolish. The battle for the innate Great Dao began to heat up. Those evildoers in the interior sky couldn't feel the surging winds below. This was because their abilities and talents made them stand out from the masses. But to the majority of cultivators, if their talents weren't enough, they could only make up for it with various external methods. For example, the Heaven's Choice continent's innate Great Dao steels. Among them, the Great Dao of the 5 elements was still the most popular. In the end, only one person could ascend to the top. But who would be willing to give up? This wasn't the style of cultivators. If you worked hard, even if you failed in the end, you wouldn't have any regrets. It was better than regretting it later. The Tian country gathered hundreds and thousands of Yin spirits for the Great Dao, but it wasn't all for the 5 elements. It was because in these years, the countries where the Great Dao steels were located had their own way of dealing with the issue of the qualifications to enter the Dao steels. There was too much profit transfer, too many to be recorded. Thus, The outsiders launched a large-scale petition in the Heaven's Choice continent, requesting the higher-ups of the Heaven's Choice to regulate the competition and restore order to the market. They wanted to give the cultivators of the main world a fair and open competition environment. Did it sound funny? But this was the way everyone in the cultivation world interacted with each other. Since the Heaven's Choice continent opened up the continent gate, of course their goal was to ease their relationship with the cultivation world of the main world. If you ended up making the cultivators of the main world unhappy, then there would be no point in opening up the continent. Thus, the higher-ups of the Heaven's Choice decided to set the price and gather the remaining 20 over Great Dao steels in the Tian country for the bidding. Once every 10 years, which Great Dao steels you chose and how much spiritium you produced, you could all bid here. In the end, the Heaven's Choice would announce it publicly. This was relatively fair. Of course, it wasn't impossible for anyone to secretly obtain a few spots. If the water was too clear, there wouldn't be any fish. This was unavoidable. Chapter 1763. Xia Bingji stood outside the 5 elemental Dao tablet in Tian country, quietly waiting for the result. She had only been here for a few decades, but she had already experienced this kind of auction twice. This was the 3rd time. If she still couldn't get it this time, she planned to give up this kind of struggle and find other ways to complete her cultivation. She wasn't disappointed. The heavens were kind to her, but she couldn't get what she wanted every time. She cultivated karma, and the item she was bidding for this time was the karma innate Dao. 100 years ago, she successfully stepped into the primordial spirit realm, and from here on, she needed to know her direction. To those true monsters, they didn't need to think too much about their future path, as high as they could go. With the 36 innate Daos in front of them, there was no room for retreat. What was more troublesome was someone like her. She couldn't be considered a monster of a realm, but she was far stronger than normal cultivators. Then, where could she set her future superego at? If she set it too high, could she compete with those true monsters? If she set it too low, would she be satisfied? Would she be able to pass the test of her own state of mind? This was the common worry of most outstanding cultivators in the main world. They couldn't compare to those at the top, but they could compare to those at the bottom. They were in an awkward situation where they couldn't reach the sky and couldn't reach the ground. In the end, she still chose to follow her heart. The opportunity was already in front of her, but she didn't have the courage to fight for it. With this kind of state of mind, even if she set her superego at a lower level, there was no chance of success. She had to fight for it. Only then would she not waste her life. Even if cultivators had the possibility of reincarnation, how many reincarnations would it take for them to encounter an era change? There were many people like her who had this kind of thinking, and thus it created the fake prosperity of the Dao tablet market in the Heaven's Choice continent. The Great Dao of Karma wasn't considered a very popular Great Dao in the Heaven's Choice continent. However, it wasn't an unpopular Great Dao either. According to her estimations, there should be at least a dozen or so people who had come here for the Great Dao of Karma. However, there were only 5 spots this time. The Dao tablet didn't allow unlimited people to enter. Normally speaking, there wouldn't be more than 20 people at a time, and most of the spots would be left for the native cultivators. The competition between them was a different kind of price, completely different from the outsiders. She had also asked around in private before. The lowest bid to enter the monument in the previous world had already been raised to 20,000 purple purity. To her, this was still a bit far. Her entire net worth was only 10,000 strands of purple purity. It was always a bit off. She did not intend to spend too much on the purple purity, even if she could borrow some of it. This was not in line with her philosophy. Too much was as bad as too little. For a cultivator, propriety was very important. Moreover, the bidding price would not always go up. Sometimes it would fluctuate. The 10,000 strands of purple purity had a chance. This was her last bid. If she still failed, she would not be obsessed with it. As a primordial soul cultivator, she had her own self-control. She was able to reach this step by relying more on her own efforts than on the accumulation of resources. After a few more hours, the final results would appear on the 5 elemental tablets. Every tablet would clearly show who was qualified, but it wouldn't show how much blood they had lost. This was a completely commercial operation. Although it was very vulgar, it was still much better than a secret operation. She wasn't the only one waiting here. Hundreds of foreign cultivators, whether Yin spirit or Yang spirit, far or near, sitting or standing, were all waiting for the result of a commercial auction. It didn't match the status of a grand cultivator, but at least it was better than a real auction where the price was raised round after round. If it really was like that, then it would be a total disgrace to the refined cultivators. There were many familiar faces. After all, because of the distance, Zhou Xian was the closest to here, so it was also the largest group. Almost 30% of the people were Zhou Xian cultivators, and then there were the individual cultivators from various star regions in the universe. There were 3 Supremes walking towards her. She felt a bit unfamiliar, but she also knew that they were also from Zhou Xian. She had met them before, but she didn't know their names. The people of Zhou Xian were also in a group here. They didn't fight together, but they exchanged information. Everyone judged the lowest standard of winning the bid together, which was beneficial to their bidding. The leader of the Supremes walked in front of her and introduced himself. "I am Shuang Kong of the Qingwei Immortal Sect. This is Yuan Shihua, and this is Fei Yu, a cultivator from the Heaven's Choice Country." "Fellow Daoist Xia, I hope we don't disturb you?" Xia Bingji immediately understood why these 3 people came. They were that dead man's bad friends. Did they come to see their sister-in-law? But she was not their sister-in-law, and they no longer had that kind of relationship. Moreover, they should have a lot of sisters-in-law, right? "No, I'm very bored. I couldn't ask for more." Fei Yu walked up intimately. "Sister is really a female immortal. They have long said that, but this is the first time we meet, and you are even better than the rumors." Xia Bingji felt a bit uncomfortable. Although they were praising her beauty, it was actually impolite to talk about her behind her back like this. All of this was because of that rotten man who disappeared after putting on his pants, but this was something she didn't want to mention. "The 3 of you are glowing. Looks like you're very confident in winning this bid. I wonder which Dao tablet you have asked for?" Bingji's knowledge is shallow. "You don't even know." Shuang Kong was a clever person. He immediately understood why this woman didn't want to mention her bad friend. The flower of the Yellow Court lived up to her reputation. It was a pity that she had let that bastard take advantage of her. He was a coward who didn't know how to cherish her. He went along with her words and said with a smile, "I cultivate fate. There is no Tao anymore. I just want to find a replacement from the other 4 destinies, so I invested in Qingyun." Huazue said concisely, "Nothingness." Fei Yu smiled like a flower. "I came here for the great Tao of creation. I didn't have much hope and just wanted to join in the fun." "Sister Bing, what great Tao do you cultivate?" Xia Bingji looked down at Dafa. "I cultivate karma. Fortunately, at least there is no conflict between us." Fei Yu didn't care. "So, what if there is a conflict? Who would take it seriously?" Actually, most of the people here are very clear that they are just supporting characters. It's just that they can't get past the barrier in their hearts. This was the truth. However, in the path of cultivation, cultivators couldn't give up struggling just because there was little hope. If they didn't struggle, they definitely wouldn't have a chance. If they struggled, there would be hope. While they were chatting, another Essence Soul Perfected Lord walked over. It was a Heaven's Choice cultivator. Although he was suave and elegant, he couldn't help but look pleased with himself.
He had a reason to be pleased.
Compared to the cultivators of this continent, these outsiders were in a difficult situation. They were far from being like them. In fact, it had long been decided. It was all due to the mutual feelings between the various great Daos. His gaze was gentle and polite. However, he ignored everyone else and only looked at Xia Bingji. This woman's beauty was outstanding even in the Heaven's Choice continent. He fell in love at first sight. "Bingji, have you thought it through?" There are still 2 hours before the announcement of the 5 Elements tablet. As long as it hasn't been announced, the result can still be changed. You just have to nod your head, and I will immediately contact the 5 Elements DAO's senior host. Your name will definitely be on the Karma qualification list. Chapter 1764. Xia Bingji's expression didn't change when she saw Zhou Xian and the other two's puzzled expressions. Thank you for your concern, fellow Daoist Lin. I didn't come here because I didn't want to force it. It's not in line with my Dao heart. As for joining your sect to cultivate together, don't mention it again. That's not my Dao. Cultivator Lin wasn't annoyed. It was impossible for someone in the primordial spirit realm to change his expression. Bingji's Dao heart is firm. I admire it very much. However, I was chatting with my senior martial brother from the 5 Paths and asked about the lowest bid for the Dao of Karma. I have bad news here. Looking at the woman's unchanging expression, he thought to himself, what is she pretending to be indifferent about? If she really doesn't care, how can she bid here 3 times in a row? She's just manipulating me. I don't believe that I can't take this woman down with this. In the Heaven's Choice continent, this kind of bidding seems fair, but if someone really wants to cheat, it's not impossible. First, I have to destroy her confidence. If I'm not wrong, Bingji's bid for the Dao of Karma is 9,000 purple, right? Originally, if nothing unexpected happened, this price really might have been successful. However, a few days ago, 3 foreign guests came. They all cultivated karma and were rich and overbearing. They were determined to win. In order to ensure that they won, they directly increased the minimum price to 3,000. Bingji, in this kind of situation, if you don't have my help, I'm afraid it will be extremely difficult for you to enter the Dao Steel to take a look. Xia Bingji sighed in her heart. She was afraid of such a troublemaker who suddenly appeared. You can't say anything. Others also did things according to the rules and didn't go through the back door. She knew that Cultivator Lin didn't lie to her because her bid of 9,000 purple was impossible to be announced to the public. If Cultivator Lin could find out about it, he must have a deep relationship with the 5 Paths. Xia Bingji lowered her eyes. It's just a worldly possession. If I get it, I'll be happy. If I lose it, what's there to regret? Fellow Daoist, you're thinking too much. Fate is like this. Maybe it's a kind of reminder? Cultivator Lin smiled slightly. You're still stubborn. Using those old Taoist sayings to absolve herself was just forcing herself to be strong in front of others. Thinking back on the quiet night, there would be a time when she would regret it. Cultivators don't lack patience. They have thousands of years of lifespan, so they don't rush things. They know that if they don't sincerely rely on others, it's meaningless to force things. Good. Bingji's Dao heart is firm. We can't compare. If you are still in Heaven's Choice in the future, feel free to help me if you need anything. This poor Daoist will not dare to not do his best. After he finished speaking, he politely nodded his head in greeting to the cultivators of Zhou Xian before walking away. It didn't matter. It was just waiting for another 10 years. It wouldn't even be enough time to go into seclusion. After bumping into a wall a few more times, she would know how powerful he was. With the influence of his sect, it was too easy to control the qualifications of an outsider. He had to let this girl understand that since she came to the Heaven's Choice continent, without his help, she shouldn't even think about entering the Great Dao Monument. When cultivators solve problems and achieve their goals, they naturally had to use the methods of cultivators. They couldn't be in a rush to fight and kill. Looking at the concerned gazes of her 3 new companions, Xia Bingji was Dafa. Just a toad. He wants to use the Dao Steel to force me to dual cultivate? I think he's lost his mind. Shuang Kong laughed inwardly. That's right. Even the biggest toad in the universe couldn't keep you here, so how could the other toads? Of course, he didn't know that the toad had already been promoted to the Frog Prince. But attitude was a must. Why don't we find a chance to get rid of him? Xia Bingji was a little speechless. As expected, they were a bunch of scoundrels. When they did things, They were lawless and daring. I will take care of Bingji's matter. There's no need to trouble you guys. I only hope that you guys will get what you want and achieve your ambitions. Crimson Moon giggled. What ambitions? There's no hope. Although Xuan Kong's great Tao of Destiny has few people, his net worth is even lower. He's the one who's lost his mind if he dares to use only 3,000 purple purity to get his qualifications. Huazue isn't any better. He fought with someone on the Heaven's Choice continent and offended a group of outsiders. They said that they'll make sure he doesn't get anything this time. Huazue had an indifferent expression. I'm just a shill. I never expected to succeed this time. If you don't believe me, just wait and see. Once I interfere, they'll have to take at least 5,000 purple purity in order to kick me out. 5,000 more per person. It'll hurt them to death. Xuan Kong laughed. You only have 1,000 purple purity more than me. How many people can you wrong? Huazue chuckled. I only have 4,000. You know that, but they don't. In private, I didn't say 4,000, but 12,000. Just wait and see. To be on the safe side, they'll have to fork out at least 3,000 purple purity to kick me out. I'm not leaving either. I'm just bluffing every time. Let's see how many purple purity they have to stop me. I can wait for hundreds of years. Xia Bingji looked at Crimson Moon, and the woman sighed. I'm not even as good as them. At least you guys can compete fairly with your net worth, but a native of the Heaven's Choice continent like me has it even harder than you guys. The so-called Heaven's Choice continent actually refers to those natural Tao nations. Unorthodox Tao nations like us are miserable. We can't compete with our net worth, and we can't compete with others in terms of our connections. Even those little Yuanying from the great Tao nations can rank ahead of us. You can imagine our situation. I'm just here to join in the fun and see my friends. With a ranking like this, even if I were to rank 100 times, it would be hopeless. Now it's great. We're all in dire straits, so we can get closer to each other. Since there was no hope, of course they could start complaining. A bunch of sour and spicy words were spewed out, belittling the arrangement of the Heaven's Choice continent as worthless. But to be honest, it was already very dafa that they could go this far with their own things. There was one good thing about the four of them. They were more open-minded, so they really didn't care. It would be a lie to say that they didn't care at all. But to think that they would do anything just because they couldn't be selected was really underestimating their state of mind. As they spoke, Crimson Moon mysteriously lowered her voice. Everyone, do you know why I gathered with you Zhou Xian people today? Xuan Kong laughed. I thought you took a liking to me and wanted to dual cultivate with me. Crimson Moon glanced at him, her face full of disdain. Snot. Don't think that you can hide your trivial matters from me. This is the Heaven's Choice continent. As the masters, if we want to know something, nothing can be hidden from us. How many concubines have you married in the Heaven's Choice continent? 3, right? Do you need me to reveal all their details? Looking at how pretentious they are, their tastes are quite heavy. Xuan Kong hurriedly interrupted. Great aunt, it's my fault. Can we not talk about this? Everyone laughed together. Xuan Kong was someone who could take a joke. With such a person in a small group, the atmosphere was always more lively. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.